Ronaldo Hilton, the chairperson designee of the New York City Loft Board. Welcome to our September 5th, 2019 public meeting. Section 282 of the New York State Multiple Dwelling Law establishes the New York City Loft Board. The board is charged with overseeing the conversion of inter-multi-dwelling buildings from commercial and manufacturing spaces to safe, rent-regulated residences that comply with the minimum standards of safety and fire protection stated in Article 7B of the New York State Multi-Dwelling Law. To achieve this goal, the board adjudicates and mediates disputes between owners and tenants, tracks the progress of each building undergoing legalization, and prosecutes parties who violate the Loft Law and the Loft Board's rules. Last month, we agreed to a 15-minute a 15-minute period to discuss the new Loft Board forms, and I'm going to open the floor up to a maximum of that time now for just to give comments back on the forms if board members so chooses.
Mr. Chairman, before we do that, I'd just like to ask a couple of questions, if I might, on kind of general topics. First and foremost, over the last couple of months, I've been apprised of the fact that there are a number of buildings where gas service has been interrupted, and I believe some of those have been at the Loft Board, and this seems to be a function of, in some cases, service being interrupted for some concern, real or imagined. In other instances, there seem to be owners who are interested in converting to electric from gas. And the situation is further compounded by National Grid taking the position that it doesn't have enough gas because the pipeline they'd like to see built has not been built. And therefore they're not interested in providing new service, which apparently can also include restored service. So I've heard from a lot of tenants who are concerned that in units where gas might provide hot water cooking and heating, that there's a danger for a very cold winter coming up. And the National Grid overlay of this seems to be affecting small businesses. There are city council members who are speaking very critically of National Grid. The governor has weighed in. And then we know that there's also the factor that for a number of years the board staff has been reticent to inspect on heat complaints with the concern of running into modine heaters that are not acceptable in residential dwelling units. So I'm just curious if the board staff can provide me with any kind of update on where we are on this, because it's a crucial issue in my view.
A lot of the posturing, I think, going on between National Grid and the governor's office, I believe I've heard of, but are you aware of any instances with Loft?
So we have had several buildings with no gas issues. I don't think the causes are really relevant. We have met with owners of buildings, owners and tenants of buildings that don't have gas, and yes, the owners are routinely proposing electric solutions under the theory that they cannot provide gas because National Grid will not give them the service that they need. So,
but that's pure speculation on the owner's part, right? I don't think there's any. I think the whole thing that I've heard, I don't want to make that part what they're saying as maybe they're taking advantage of National Grid's posturing with the governor's office regarding the supply of gas thing to get to where they want to go. I'm not sure if this is the truth or not, because from what I understand is National Grid, they threatened new gas service, but I think a lot of it is just, as I said, posturing because of the governor's not approving their pipeline.
Well, but apparently National Grid has taken the position that restoring gas service once it's been cut off is new service. So
I don't know that that's true. I think the issue is that in a lot of our buildings, there were illegal gas lines, so that there needs to be new gas piping and new meters. So I think that's really the issue. So you're talking about people that have had gas, tenants that have had gas, but to restore the gas that's been cut off, the owner needs to legalize the system, and that will involve some sort of sub-metering, new meters for each of the units, etc. And that's my sense is where National Grid is drawing the line. So when we have new meters, that seems to be an issue.
It also has something to do with the two major explosions, one up in Harlem and the other in the East Village. And so the gas companies are very cautious about this stuff. And very often in some of these old buildings, they find little micro leaks, in which case the gas can be turned off.
Right.
And Con Ed doesn't care how long.
right.
And I know there's a couple of buildings that are without gas for a couple of 3-4 years.
Yeah, I believe 18th Street has gone without gas and without heat now for a couple of winters. So this is, and I have, pointed out to the tenants that I've spoken with that, the horrendous explosions on 2nd Avenue up in East Harlem, and I think the one in East Harlem killed like a dozen people. It was like very serious. So yeah, no, if you've got a gas line that's not kosher, clearly that needs to be addressed. But if the current context is, well, yeah, your gas gets cut off, who knows when you're going to get it turned back on, this really creates a kind of, apropos of the preamble that you read at the opening of every meeting. It seems to me that it's incumbent on us to take a deeper dive into this as it affects the owners and tenants of these buildings, because there seems to have been a surprising number of incidents this summer. Maybe that's a coincidence. Maybe it's not. And I'm also aware, I've read articles of small businesses where, the taqueria out in Bensonhurst is all set to open, but can't open because there's no gas. It cuts across a lot of different lines.
That's where I've heard National Grid is about commercial supply, not residential. So but loft buildings could be commercial, residential too. So I'm not. But they're posturing regarding whether or not they're going to grant new commercial service. That was able to grant new commercial service. That was the rumor. That was the news that I heard. I didn't hear anything about residential. It affects residential service.
When the law board receives a call from a tenant says, I don't have hot water, I don't have heat, and the gas is off, do we go inspect? Do we write a violation? What are we doing?
So, first of all, it's not heating season, so we can't do anything with heat complaints now, right? The first thing we always do is contact the owner. What do they know? What don't they know? We usually send an inspector. Will they write a violation? It really depends on the circumstances. We have one particular building where we know it was a tenant that called. It was about a leak in his particular unit. And DOB inspected and not surprisingly found a tremendous amount of illegal gas work, and they shut off the gas to the building. We have met with the tenants and the owners of several buildings, and the owners are pushing for electric, and many owners are willing to make concessions, sometimes not as many concessions as the tenants would like. But it is difficult to to reach agreements. Tenants want gas cooking, I don't blame them. I cook a lot, I love my gas stove and would not want to cook on electric. So that is a big impediment to moving forward with a lot of the work. So we have scheduled several, we had at least three or four, at least three, maybe four. We had at least 3 conferences during August with these buildings where the gas has been shut off.
And do we see a way forward on this?
The way forward I see is alternate plan applications, which is not going to get anybody heat during the summer, during the winter, because people are not coming to agreements and we can't force them to agree.
I know of at least one architect who's suggested that one way out of a temporary patch would be to have the owner provide a generator on the street that would provide electric heat. Because also I know some of these buildings that converting to electric means a ton of electric work that also can't be done very quickly. It's not just, oh, I don't want electric because A, it's not as good, and B, it's going to cost me a boatload. So the landlord's transferring a cost, which is a separate issue. But also in a lot of these buildings, even if the tenants say, great, we want electric, we'll pay whatever it is. I've got a 1-year-old kid, you've got me, I give up, I'll pay whatever it is. I have a 1-year-old child. They still aren't going to be able to do it.
So electrical work, I think, could be done faster, and we do have owners that are pushing to get electrical permits to do electrical upgrades, but that involves working tenant units and tenants, and I'm not, this is not a value judgment one way or the other, but tenants are holding out for concessions. So they're negotiating and they'll negotiate. In terms of a generator on the street for the buildings that we held the conferences, that was discussed at every conference. And you can only, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is you can only do that if you have a central distribution network to get the heat to all of the places in the building, and a lot of our buildings don't have that. They have individual heating units that are gas supplied. So having a generator on the street, you wouldn't be able to hook up to all the different places. That's what we've been told.
Ductwork doesn't exist.
No, but he's,
And that's by both.
he's not talking about a boiler, he's talking about a generator, an electric generator.
I understand that, but you have to be able to distribute the heat, right?
Distribute the electricity.
Well, the generator's generating heat, isn't it?
Electricity. Is that what it?
Yeah.
Electricity. And that would be.
Well, so you're not talking about the boiler on the street.
No, not a boiler.
You're talking about a power source on the street that could power an electric heating system in the building.
Yeah, which would be a lot of
So
wiring
like
also.
space heaters, you mean?
Well, it would feed electricity to the units that they could use space heaters, that they could feed off and get space heaters. Those are massive generators which would require permits also and a lot of wiring to go with it.
No one, I think, is under the impression there's an easy fix to this.
Yeah.
But there does seem to have been a rash of these issues crop up for some reason this summer, and it creates there's a lot of fear and trepidation, which the gas was taken out of our building. The only gas now in the building fires the boiler that heats that runs the pressurized steam system that heats the upper floors and provides hot water to the commercial tenants and actually the residential tenants on the second floor. So I lost my gas cooking, and it's unfortunate, but having to cook on electric is one thing. Having no heat for the winter and or possibly no hot water is a real health and safety issue, whereas having to cook pasta electrically rather than gas or not be able to run your wok over gas is unfortunate, but it's not a health and safety issue.
Hot water doesn't seem to be as much of an issue. just based on what we've seen over the past couple of months, owners are able to put in temporary electric hot water. But I guess the electricity that they would need to run space heaters, or the size of the space heaters, is much more than the hot water heaters. So I think hot water is not as much. It doesn't seem to me to be as much of an
Hot
issue.
water is the way to go nowadays.
No, I don't necessarily, I think that if you make your own hot water in your own loft, right, you need a 220 line,
Yeah.
just for that.
Right.
You can't double it up with, let's say, a dryer or a washer. And that's really quite expensive. You gotta get into the where the electricity is, bring up a new 220 line or more than one. And it gets to be quite expensive. And I think the city somehow has to come to grips with this problem because gas is going to be diminished over the years. So there is no solution to this except to make the city aware that this is a problem. We see it here with these loft buildings, but a lot of the tenements in East Harlem and all over the city, those buildings are really in terrible condition.
So you bring up a good point about making the city aware. Maybe is this something from some sort of a letter from the law board or something to City Hall that would just kind of make awareness to this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I would also add to it, because this is what I do in architecture, is hyper efficiency, and energy code's getting pretty stringent. So the idea with switching to electric is that your building envelope is following energy code, so it's much more efficient. If these buildings under Loft law are allowed to skip that step and not have insulation when they're renovating, it's actually very inefficient and expensive on the tenant side to run electric for heat and cooling. We all have a responsibility, all citizens in New York, to try and get off fossil fuel. I teach a class in this too, and I just spoke to the director at National Grid, and there's actually biofuel coming online from our waste treatment center. So there are some alternative, it's called renewable natural gas and biofuel that's coming online. Europe has it. But these are all, I do think it's all a good point that Chuck brings it up before the heating season. Ronaldo, if you think the letter's good, but I think it's a bigger issue than...
I think it'd be a great idea if something is drafted from the law board, just to, or a DM or a deputy mayor over there, and kind of making them aware that these are problems facing our law community, Loft community, because I'm sure it's of interest to both tenants and owners, and so we could probably do something. Maybe either we can talk about having you. I'm sorry, Julie.
That's right.
About you. We can work together to try to draft something.
Sure. What do you think, Chuck?
Somebody up
Does
there.
that sound-
I hope this will work, because on the other hand, the real estate industry doesn't think very much of the law work to begin with. I almost think it's a joke.
From what? I'm sorry.
The real estate industry.
That's all right. You just push back.
Yeah.
And, so this little agency is suddenly...
No, but it's okay. We do our part. We kind of raise awareness and we put it out there. Who knows? It may catch fire, or the right person may see it.
The right person.
Yeah. So we'll do that. And the letter can be copied to a whole host of people also, right? Including the legislatures and all that stuff. Let them be aware of what the problems are facing right now, especially in this environment. So we do need to get to rules. Yeah.
I think that's a good first step, and Julie and I will work on it with Ronaldo. Is that absolutely correct conclusion? However, I would ask the board staff to also consider this question of looking into requiring in buildings where there is a problem of the potential of having the owner be responsible to provide an electric supply where possible. Because what's happening otherwise is like whether the gas was cut off purely through the due diligence of National Grid, or I believe they have a subcontracting group that goes out and performs inspections, or a tenant makes a call, or maybe a landlord makes a call. Once the gas is off, the negotiating balance between the owners and the tenants is tilted considerably in the owner's favor, insofar as unless the owner lives in the building, he or she goes home to heat and hot water and maybe even cooking gas. Whereas the tenants, and I know some of these buildings involve families with young kids, they're looking at an entire, easily a great likelihood, and if you take 18th Street as an example, maybe a couple of years of no heat. So that's really asking me to negotiate with a gun if I had to. And that doesn't seem, A, it doesn't seem fair, and B, I don't think it's going to produce great outcomes in the long run.
All right, so the only thing I would keep in mind, we have to have alternatives, whether it be a generator or just putting in the electricity, but I guess the circumstances dictate whether actions that can be able to compel or compel the owners to do it. Yeah.
Just a question for him. So you had said that because it's not the heating season that we can't take heating complaints, or is it just they don't come in during this time?
We can't do anything about them. I mean, if you look at the rules define the heating season and the temperatures that need to be measured. So, we're not in heating season.
But you couldn't have a heat complaint unless you
Well,
have
obviously there's a humanitarian concern here that I'm trying to determine. Oftentimes we see people in desperation do things to get heat that aren't safe.
Yeah.
Right.
And I've been soaking this all in here, trying to come up with, something that I feel like I get where we're going with this, but I feel like we need some sort of educational component somehow, that if these folks do call us and say, hey, I happen to hear it's going to be a bad winter, I don't necessarily feel that it should be a complaint for us to provide them some sort of educational material in what not to do. Because in desperation, these folks are going to come up with all kinds of quasi-home heating systems, which, to Chuck's point, are not being inspected by DOB or the fire department or HPD. And maybe we should try to get in front of that somehow and provide education. Now, if the people don't take the education, we can't really control that.
So I'm going to assume that the fire department has educational materials available about that, right?
Right.
So if
We
you'd
have
like
to
to give those to us, we would be more than happy to distribute them.
Okay. Well, that's a little piece of the puzzle, I think. Yeah, we should probably.
Yeah, no, obviously, the danger with homebrew heating solutions is either carbon monoxide or increased risk of fire. So, and I know years ago in a building that went without heat back in the 70s, the father of the house would routinely go out and find old trucking pallets, break them up and bring them in and burn them in a wood-burning stove, which did not have, which had kind of a potchkey ventilation system, and that's not, you'll do what you got to do to keep your family warm, but it seems to me that anything we can do would be proactive.
So just to confirm, so if we'll provide literature, we can discuss the logistics later of how you determine how to distribute the literature people are calling in, or you want to refer the calls to my office at the fire.
Let's talk about it offline.
Let's talk. Maybe if you can forward us the link to from the fire department's own page that talks about heat issues or heating, illegal heating or whatever, fire safety issues regarding that. Maybe we can also make that part of our Loft board, put that on the Loft board sites
On
also.
the website?
Yeah.
A link that they can click.
Right.
Okay.
So we can refer to that. So we do need to move on, as I said, Chuck.
We do, but I have just two other quick questions,
Okay.
and maybe possibly three. One is just based on our experience with these longer days, I wonder if the board is considered, the staff is considered, 10:30 for me is just enough time to go into the office and get stuck. You know, I'd almost rather start at 9 and be done at 2, or start at 12 and go to 6, but 10:30 to 3:30 is kind of like, so I'm just,
We're flexible. I thought we were going to need time to come in. What time are we available here?
It depends.
So-
We have to look.
I don't think we would have anything earlier than when we, before we get in here, but of course it's dependent upon whether or not the room is available. And that's a great, that's
I
a
just
great
tossed
thing.
that out as a thought.
I don't care if we start at 9:30, it'd be great for us too, actually. So it also, we'd have to kind of poll the board members and see what's also available. But you're right, I prefer the earlier start.
It's kind of taking the slice out of the middle of the day.
For me, it would be better, but I'm not sure about the others. You know, we'd have to check on the availability. So do me a favor, on the next, for the next board meetings that are day-long like this, could you just find out the availability for earlier start, and Helene will do the polling.
Two other quick notes.
That should be one more, but go ahead.
No, I said three. I said three. Now we're down to two. At my request, that rather cheap shot hit job article that ran in Cranes was distributed to the board members.
Yes, I have that.
And it goes along with kind of the real estate issue of viewing this as a joke, which A, they don't understand, but they're happy to make fun of. When you get a subhead called Bored to Death, B-O-A-R-D, you kind of wonder whose life is at risk. But in talking to the reporter after the article appeared, after having lodged a complaint with the managing editor, the reporter really had no stats, and so my point is simply, I know, Helene, that you're understaffed, seriously, but at some point, if we can get some up-to-date stats on how many buildings are in the system and that kind of
I
thing.
got stats. Were they asking for stats?
I walked him through why his sort of conclusions.
we don't
No
really-
buildings have
we
been
don't
legalized
really-
in Queens. I said, there aren't that many buildings in Queens. You know.
Well, they...
I just want to say that the owner mentioned in that article is suing us. So our position was, we are in litigation and we are not commenting, and I will maintain that position. If you want stats, we can certainly give the board stats. But in terms of that article, I feel very strongly that we're not saying anything. We're being sued.
Well, but let me ask you a question as a follow-up to that. If a reporter for a more kind of even-handed publication is curious about a building where there's a lawsuit, but also wants general information about how the Loft law works, is there a way you can kind of wall that off and say, we're not talking about this,
Yeah.
but if you want to, because this guy basically, the reporter who, having talked to him, I believe the word I would use would be unctuous.
I don't know. I
Some
didn't
of the
comment,
issues,
so I
Fred
don't
Ornstein would
comment.
say, certain people. Without facts to build something around, there's a lot of room for fantasy. So I just, if there's a way to kind of...
So, just so you know, procedurally, reporters or news media have to go through our press office that coordinates with them, and it is, we cannot directly deal with news media. So it goes, whatever request they make comes through our press office that coordinates with us. A lot of times, from my experience, I'm not saying it's in this particular article at all, I'm just saying my experience, they come at the very, very last minute when they're ready to write their article or they write their news report. and they ask at the very last minute, because a lot of times reporters are not objective, right? They're just kind of siding in one side or the other, and so they've completed that stuff, and then they come to us at the very last minute, by 5 o'clock, provide us with this, and it's like, so they already postured and done their thing, but it's not our final decision on what goes out to the press like that. It goes through our press.
And when you say press office, you mean DOB?
DOB, yes, we're part of DOB.
Okay, thanks. Last question, I
Sort of
promise.
part of DOB.
I know, Helene, that I heard you remark earlier this summer that one of the things that you were working on is the website.
Yes.
And I'm guessing there's things going on under the surface, because I haven't seen much change on the surface.
Yes, but they are actively working on it. Like, it finally came up in the rotation, so I don't know.
It's
communications
almost-
or-
It's almost done.
They are actually
It's going to be
working on it.
launched. You won't see it, but it's going to be good. It's going to be good. It's going to be good. And the last communication I heard from our press folks was that, the website is being coordinated. The work on the website is being coordinated through Do It, which doesn't, which has to conform the website
Right.
to a whole bunch of requirements that the city. If you notice, all the city agencies' websites are looking almost the same way now.
Yeah.
So they have to do that, and it's a lot of different agencies and sub-agencies that has to come into play. We are in the process right now. I understand the content is there already. It's just a matter of...
Do you have any sense of when Do It will do it?
I don't know.
I missed a call from the press officer yesterday, and I think that's probably an update that they were trying to give me, but I will we'll find out.
So would it be unrealistic to hope for a go-live date in September?
I really don't know, honestly. I don't want to say.
I can-
I can find out.
I believe you
We
100%.
can try and find out and report back at the next meeting.
We will, but it's not unrealistic.
And once it's up in that kind of city standard mode, which I know exactly what you're talking about, because they all them websites look alike now. Will it be easier? Is it kind of a content management system where it'll be easier to make changes?
I don't know if it'll be easier or harder.
Oh God, I hope it. How could it be harder?
It should have an easy back end so that you can update it, I would think, in 2019.
I think it depends on what the updates are, but right now it's not terribly onerous when we have to post agendas and things like that.
But I mean, for example, right now, it's still, if you look at the existing website, it's big news that the Loft board has moved from the 4th floor to the 5th floor, which at this point is, what, 6 months ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, so one would think that in a perfect world, and I realize the city is not a perfect world, that saying, oh, let's take that off and put this first would be something that you all could do without having to have Do It do it.
This is Do It managed. The website's Do It managed. That's the way the city has. And I
But
guess
we
it's-
can take that, we can ask them to take that piece down if you want.
Oh,
That we moved.
oh, I see.
Well, when you look at what's new, and what's new is we moved from the 4th floor to the 5th floor, and there's not a whisper of the new law. It is kind of like, huh?
It's because I think the content stuff is being focused on the new design, the new website.
Yeah, so,
But we should,
Chairperson Hilton, I
Yes.
wanted to say I don't want to take any more time before we start rulemaking, but I'm wondering if at the end of the session I could ask a couple of questions. It's more about, because we had a break, and so this is our first time seeing you, so I think it's natural. we have
is it
some
that
questions.
quick? We just do that now.
Well, I don't want to delay.
Let's do that now because we're just gonna.
Oh,
Let's
okay.
go into the rule.
My two were just follow-ups on some issues. One, I had written a letter from the spring about self-certifying loft law buildings, and I'm wondering if Loft board staff spoke with DOB and if there's any follow-up. My second question is about the project guidelines coming out, if there's a date when they're going to be online for everyone.
They're already,
Okay.
They put,
Project guidelines are up now.
I got a copy of it earlier,
No,
but I
it's
don't
actually
know.
on the web.
It is on the website?
Oh, yeah. It's been up.
Sometime at the end of July.
I'm sorry, I
think it
thought
was-
the board was not, like, sorry. Put it out to the board members? Oh, I'm sorry, if we didn't put it out to the board members, we should have.
I'm also
But it is up,
wondering,
yeah.
as a result of that, if there's any feedback on how, because for the public, I think that, there's not much public, I think the idea is there's a cohort of building examiners that are only going to be handling loft law buildings.
Yes.
So it'd be good to know how that's going, like checking in with them and see.
So we have a training scheduled, I think it's the end of next week with the examiners. It's not us, it's DOB Tech Affairs.
And that's the plan, right? To get those plan examiners straightened out. But the actual content of the project guidelines itself, if you have any problems, maybe Chuck, I think you've seen it, right? So maybe you can, if you have any comment, really quick, Chuck, you can say it. We haven't heard any.
I promised I was done.
We haven't had any feedback on it, really. Maybe because a lot of people really don't know yet, but it's there. Certainly the professionals that were involved in the draft.
Well, you were
I guess it'd be nice if, as it's rolling out, if we had some way to know how it's working. Some feedback loop from you.
Well, I will
speaking to-
say that even before it was rolled out, at some of the narrative statement conferences, there was feedback from the architects that, at least for me, who had gone to some of the meetings, I was able to say to myself, project guidelines, they follow the project guidelines. Because those were plan examiners who were working on drafting the guidelines. So, I mean, there has been forward motion based on the stuff in the guidelines, the material in the guidelines. And I assume it will continue and grow after the training.
Sorry, the training is when?
I don't remember the exact date. Tomorrow. Oh, no, wait a minute, no, sorry, wrong date. 13th.
All right, thank you.
I will ask one follow-up. Is that intended to be just a one-shot deal?
No, there's a follow-up scheduled a couple weeks after that. Sort of to give them the overview and then let them deal with it for a couple weeks and then get feedback. Yeah. And again, this is not me, this is DOB Tech Affairs, it's their, well, I'll be there, but it's their way.
And I don't remember the answer to my first question, which was about the self-certification and if that's been investigated.
I think the particular ones that you pointed out, we had already looked into, but I will check on it and get back to you, okay?
Well, as I recall, the letter, it was more a request for us to kind of take a look at the advisability of that approach in the law community.
All right, let's just revisit that. I'm sorry. Maybe I dropped the ball on that one. Okay, I'll take it. I get it. Thank you. All right, so we have a staff announcement, and then Helene will roll on with the rules. Thanks.
So I want to introduce Amy Lee, who is our new staff attorney. She started Tuesday, so we're very happy to have her here, and I will say that Amy is also an engineer, so she has a degree in what, environmental?
Applied sciences and engineering, concentration in civil environment.
Concentration of what?
Civil
environment.
Civil.
Great.
So all questions for her.
Well, technical questions, now go ahead.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, we moving?
Okay.
Yeah. So I wanted to start with this document, which was, the forms.
Well, we used the form times. All right, go ahead.
If you want to.
Any comments on the
If you want to
forms?
hold the forms till
Yeah.
next meeting.
Yeah, let's
I'm
do
fine
that.
with
Yeah, if you don't mind.
And
yeah.
just let me say one thing though, that I know one of the forms that we gave you had some dates that were incorrect and those have been corrected. So,
Which one is that?
I think it was the 281-6 application, the 281-6 registration. I think it had some incorrect dates. Okay, so I had handed out a document at the July meeting based on questions that the board members had had when we were going through 208. So I wanted to address the issues in that document first, and hopefully we could wind up 208 and then go back to 201. So the first questions regarded footnotes. So we had asterisks in some of the rules, and the board wanted to know what the footnotes say. So on pages 142 and 143 of our master document, that's where the footnotes are. So do we have any questions about the content? Do you want to change it, or? I think they're fairly straightforward.
My question is, it seems odd to have footnotes to a rule. You would think if it's important enough to be in the document, that it should be in the body of the document rather than, I think a footnote's in an academic paper, and if I want more detail, I can read the footnote or get a source, but if I'm reading a rule, you'd think, it just seems, I don't think I've ever, I don't see much in the way of law that resorts to footnotes.
So you want to move the footnotes up into the rule? I'm okay with that.
It looks like, I'm just looking quickly, but at least 3 of them look like words that are being defined, so it seems like it goes into definitions, right? Grandfathering.
Yes,
Living
yes. Which
independently.
grandfathering procedures apply in which circumstances, and the definition of family. So we could certainly insert text there.
Move it to the
rule itself.
Rule itself, or define it in the definitions, if it has to.
I mean, the flip side would be, do we need it?
I mean, I think it's good to have the information there, particularly about the grandfathering clauses, but at this point, I think it's kind of, it doesn't really matter. Because I assume that these were put in, I don't know when they were put in, but my guess is it would have been like at the very beginning when the rules were first enacted, right? So, whatever you want to do.
Anyone?
Which line is family?
Family is on page 143, line 16. Be the residence of a home or a family, in quotes, as defined in MDL 4, paragraph 5, section 4, paragraph 5, that is living independently. And then it has the definition of that's contained in 4.5. The footnote has the definition.
I think that one should definitely go in the rule.
Well, I think if we're going to do one, we should do one.
Of family?
My personal preference would be to just put it right there, so you don't have to look somewhere else.
It makes no grammatical sense.
The footnotes.
The footnotes,
Oh, well, that's a different problem.
yeah.
So the definition section that we have now defines family as having the meaning in 4.5 and may consist of a person or persons regardless of whether they are related by marriage or ancestry. That's what we have now.
Who defined that? I'm curious. I just did a
Take out the
workshop,
footnote.
It's probably the multiple.
multiple dwelling law, because I just did a workshop where
4.5 is a multiple dwelling.
on census, how they define household, family or not, and I'm just wondering
Yeah.
if it's in
Yeah, MDL.
just MDL, it's
Well,
not.
we use the MDL.
In here?
So does the business department.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, add this definition here, just delete this. This is not in our own rules.
So,
Twice.
Okay, so do you want to say that? Perhaps what we can do is put the multiple dwelling definition into the definition section and delete that footnote completely. Instead of referencing.
Is there any conflict between the footnote and the MDL?
no, the footnote, both of them reference the MDL. The difference is that the definition of family that we have in ours adds regardless of whether they were related by marriage or ancestry. But that's okay. So we could keep that in anyway.
So put the footnote into the definition section.
To be family, right, so family is a person or persons occupying a dwelling or maintaining a household with not more than 4 boarders, roomers, or lodgers, or 2 or more persons occupying a dwelling living together and maintaining a common household with not more than 4 boarders, roomers, or lodges, regardless of whether they are related by marriage or ancestry. That would be the definition of family in our rule, and then we would, in the definition section in the front, and then we would change this to be the residence of a home or family that is living independently.
Now, what you're reading is different than
What?
the existing footnote.
Yeah, just be careful. I think,
The existing so what I just read is the existing footnote, and then I added, which is in our current definitional section, right, in the first, chapter 1, regardless of whether they are related by marriage or ancestry.
no, I'm just saying, you mentioned something personal persons, and I think just make it, be careful, because I think what you just read was not what I was reading.
Person, oh, a
Right.
person
There-
occupied,
there's-
yeah.
just make sure we
it says
get
person
the-
or persons. Yeah, I mean, obviously.
Yeah, it's all good in terms of, but I think we need to just make sure it matches.
So what I mean, the gist of this, if I were trying to explain it to an ordinary person, would be that family, whatever the family is, can also include 4 boarders, or plus 4 boarders.
Not more than
Not
4
more than.
borders, roomers,
Up
or
to.
lodgers. Yeah,
Up to 4.
Borders, and borders mean that you're living there with, the person is living there with, while they're there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Family.
yeah, but on the 2 or, the 2 or more persons occupying a dwelling, living together and maintaining a common household, I mean, we had some litigation surrounding that whole concept.
I'm sure.
Well, you may remember the case, I mean, the board had decided the case saying that, I think it was like 9 unrelated individuals, and we decided that that didn't meet the definition of family, and the court actually struck it down and said, well, you have to see whether or not they had a common household. So, you could have 9 unrelated people living together if they're maintaining a common household, and they could theoretically be a family, regardless of boarders, roomers, or lodgers.
Whatever happened to traditional family values?
What happened?
Why can't we be living in the 1950s? It was all so much.
No, thank you.
What was that Loft board case? I remember it, it was from Lower
Street.
Manhattan, but do you know the Loft board number?
No, but I did 13, 15 Thames? Okay. So we'll take out the footnote. So on page 143, on line 16, we'll change this to say, be the residence of a home or home of a family. We'll take out as defined in MDL 4.5 plus the 3 stars. That is living independently. And then we'll change the definition of family at the front, in what is that, 113? 112, to include the MDL definition instead of just referencing it.
So we'll end up with one comprehensive definition.
Yes.
Just minor, but I think important. When you mentioned the 1315 Thames case, so me as a law board member, I'm trying to get a sense of like the important cases that also affect how things are decided here. So I'm starting, I have a list going, but I don't know if you have one that the public can have or that we can all have that's like kind of big cases that are, you know, it's sort of like case law for the Loft Law Board that are important to know.
I don't know that we don't have any comprehensive like reporter.
Like similarly, the DOB just did the project guidelines and they mentioned all the technical bulletins, 1993, et cetera, that actually affect certain, you know, where certain decisions were made. I'm thinking that this case law is similar, where it's important, especially for non-lawyers, to know what was decided, like at 1315 Thames, how that might affect something going forward, right?
I mean, certainly we can give you copies of decisions. That 1315 Thames was also a court case. So clearly, you know, where the court is ruling in particular, if it's an appellate division.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know that Thames was. It was Supreme. So, you know, clearly when there's a decision by the appellate division or the Court of Appeals, those are going to be important and binding. So we can certainly send you that, but I don't know that there's like a top 10 hit list kind of thing, if that's
I think there is. Isn't there? I think there is.
I don't know. I think it depends on the issue that's presented in the case, you know.
Yeah. But having it alongside, certainly when I'm reading through the rules and I'm reading about family, but then there's this other case where 9 people were, it was overturned, the decision, and, you know, like that's relevant to know.
So we can send you that decision.
Okay.
I understand what Julie's asking.
No, New York Law School, I mean, all the decisions are on New York Law School's city admin law website, but I don't think that that's what you're asking for. What you're asking for is more like a legal digest, where, you know, the subject matter experts distill the cases and they produce a document that says, hey, here are the key things in this particular area of law, and it's broken down by sections. I mean, there's like legal digest. They are called digests, right? Yeah, okay. It's like ancient history for me, called back in law school. All right, so that's what you're asking for. We don't have that.
Well, I feel like it's in the Loft Law Board's head, and it's in the heads of the lawyers on landlord and tenant side, but it's not necessarily in my head because I'm more of like just a normal citizen who's not a lawyer. So as I'm trying to parse out and understand everything, it would be helpful to have that list. It doesn't have to be a detailed digest of things or like long cases. It's just.
So honestly, I have to say, we don't have it. I don't know that we have the resources to do it right now.
Yeah.
We give you the cases to decide the cases. If you are concerned in rulemaking and you want to say, hey, are there any cases that you think I ought to know about when we're considering these rules?
Yeah.
We could certainly try and pull cases for you, but to develop a digest, we just can't do that now.
Okay, not a digest. Like I spoke to a lawyer that gave me like 4 important cases and I just took notes and now I know them. And
4 cases that lawyer considers important.
I typed them up and now I have it and I'd like to like keep building on that.
Okay.
Whether it's my time or someone else's time, I don't know. But I just like, I need to know this stuff to be able to be a good citizen serving the public.
I think what Julie's asking is
an idea we're considering, and maybe it doesn't need to be a digest so much as just a list, like windows, Doris, and this and that. I mean, there are 2 or 3 Windows cases that kind of pave the way.
Like reference.
More like a schematic, you know.
I think that author uses.
Okay, again, you don't have that document. We would have to actually assign somebody to produce that document. We no longer have interns, as you can see, they're not here anymore. And
Maybe we could generate it, the loft board, and you critique it and tell us if we.
can we just,
I don't think I'm being a joke here. I think
I'm not-
I'm being very
I'm taking it
serious.
very seriously, and I'm telling you that we don't have the resources to do this, and that we set aside 5 hours to do rulemaking. It is now, we're almost an hour and a half in, and we've barely done anything.
Okay,
That's what
well,
I'm
I see your frustration. That's why I was going to talk about 2 items at the end of the meeting. But to me, this is intrinsic to rulemaking without being a fool. I need to understand what the case law is, and I'm not a lawyer. So what I'm asking for is not irrational. It's a very rational request.
I didn't say it wasn't. I said we don't have the resources to prepare that.
Okay, so I just said that we would prepare it for you, and then you critique it. That should save you a ton of time and put more time on our plate.
Okay. All right. Let's move on. Next.
Okay. So that takes care of, I believe, the first 3. So are we okay with the other 2 footnotes, or do you want to move the text of the footnotes into the rule? For the one on 142 line 16 or 143 line 2? Do you want to move that text up into the rule, or do you want to leave it as a footnote? I think you don't want to leave it as a footnote,
I
which
think
is
we
fine
should
with me.
move them all into the.
We should move them all.
Yeah, we're all in agreement.
We
Should we
need
take out-
consistency. If we're going to move one, we just.
We should move them all.
Okay, we will do that. That's fine. All right. Just so we'll move the first 2, right? So 142 line 16, we'll get rid of the footnote and make it, put it into the rule, and 143 line 2, we'll put it into the rule. And then 143 line 16, we'll clear it into. Yeah. Okay, so that brings us to 145, page 145, line 6, and the definition of cellar. So the board had asked for different definitions of cellar, and we want to keep, right now, we reference MDL, the MDL definition of cellar, which is section 4 is the MDL's definition section, and it's paragraph 37. So that's the first thing that you were given. The next one is the zoning resolution, and the last one is the building code.
Well, for openers, as usual, trying to read the zoning resolution is a challenge, and they go way ahead of their time with hashtags. You just got to hand it to them. They were visionary.
Hashtags are just, in the zoning resolution, hashtags are things that are defined terms.
Yes, I know. They're just, well, that's how we're all hashtags in a way, but they're the most visionary thing that the city planning has done in many a year. How, trying to plow through these, how much difference is there between them?
I think that's a question for Ms. Moskowitz, as far as Moskowitz.
I mean, they should be in sync, more or less. I mean, I have to deal with, I mean, what comes up for me, though, so I'm curious to read through this. Like I have, I mean, this always comes up as an issue with a brownstone or any building that you're looking at. Sometimes what would be called the basement is actually, you just walk right in off the sidewalk because they changed the grading. So it's still actually called a basement, even though it's on the street, really. It's, the entire thing's on the street. So it's, every time I do a project, I have to investigate this because it's, zoning calls it basement plus 2-story. A surveyor might come and call it a 3-story, but that's not how New York City DOE code looks at it. examiners look at it. So it's always an assessment, but essentially like as an example, every row house, like that first garden floor, a real estate euphemism calls it garden, we call it basement. I have a project now where the basement is fully above grade, but it's still defined as a basement with 2 stories above it. So it's
Well, fortunately, we don't have to deal with basements, right? So we were able to delete the references to basements, but the question is what definition of cellar?
Obviously, where this is germane is that I can predict with a high degree of certainty that there will be a case somewhere down the line that will turn on, no, it's not a cellar, it's a basement. No, it's a basement, not a cellar.
I always notice, I mean, what I know, because I had to do this for Build It Back as well, because no one was allowed to keep a cellar. So that this came up, this was like a big issue too with DOB. And it was, yeah, so if you don't have windows and you're below grade, you're a cellar, essentially. Cellar, every space I do, like row houses, you're supposed to write like no one's going to inhabit this space. You know,
In your notes,
DOB
in
does,
your plan notes.
in my plan notes.
Well, to me, the two terms don't make a whole lot of difference. I always thought of the cellar being beneath the basement.
It is, yeah.
Right.
But a cellar is beneath the basement?
A cellar beneath the basement. But in this instance,
That's right. It's
it's not necessarily.
No, it could be, yeah.
Yeah, so if a basement, I mean, certainly in these tenement buildings where there's a stoop down, right, and then maybe it leads on to, as you say, onto a garden where there's a window there, and there's a window down the stairway, that's legal, but not in laws.
Mr. Chairman, how closely does what we have now match up with what the DOB?
That's what it is.
This is what it is, that's what we have to stay with, really, because I'm telling you that we have to cross-reference this stuff every day, and we use the DOB, even the FDNY uses the DOB as our
We had a case,
baseline
yeah.
of what we follow. If the
Did we
DOB says
Did
it's...
we also decide a case recently?
That was basement, but we don't have to deal with basements anymore.
So, okay, so the difference between the cellar and the basement is only the height from grade, right? The livable area, less than a half of the livable space is below grade.
I mean, clearly the zoning resolution definition, which is several paragraphs, is more specific than either of the two. The DOB definition is the shortest, and the MDL definition is in the middle. There is an argument to be made that since Article 7C is part of the MDL, we should use the definitions in the MDL, but I don't know that we necessarily must. The thing that,
We think we would have to explain
Why we're not,
why we're
right.
not, and why it gives us the authority not to.
Does it conflict in any way?
does the definition of the MDL conflict with the DOB definition or the zoning definition? The DOB definition is not as specific, right, below the grade plane. I mean, basically, they all talk about the space having more than 1/2 of its height below the curb level, and then, of course, you get into the issue of what is the curb level, and here, NBL 4-37 talks about how you figure out what the curb level is. DOB doesn't have that. DOB just talks about the grade.
What I'm finding is that DOB may use some terms that has to be more defined. You have to look further into the MDL
Right.
or the zoning to get a more precise definition, but I mean a more precise understanding. But definition is pretty much similar. It's just that it's more precisely defined in the zoning.
Well, it tells you how to calculate it, right? I mean, the
Yeah, but that's not
DOB's...
part of the definition. That's not, I mean, how to calculate is not part of the definition. That's just, you know, just.
Well, like the DOB definition says that portion of a building that is partly or wholly underground having one or more of its clear height as measured from finished floor to finished ceiling below the grade plane. Well, what's the grade plane?
Right, and then if
Right.
you have to go find a great plan
Well,
definition,
right.
you would go somewhere else.
I would just add to that, that this happened with Build It Back, all the hundreds of projects that
Yeah.
everyone worked on. And we had to have a survey
Right.
stamp as part of our set, because you have to have those grade plan, you have to have everything marked. You can't just go by the word of the architect.
Right.
You need the surveys. So that's one start, I would say, if we're anticipating there might be a future issue with seller, that there should have to be a surveyor's survey produced.
But that's not part of the definition, right? That would be procedurally what we would require.
Yeah, procedurally.
Right. So we could probably put that in our rules of some sort that, to require that, the thing in terminating that.
I mean, I don't know that we necessarily.
DOB does that, I'm just saying, like, if we were,
I don't know.
I think that would be an issue, if the
you
issue
say?
came up in a case, I think that would be an issue of proof. And I'm hesitant to tell people what they must produce in terms of their evidence for their cases.
right, so DOB would make them do that, I'm just saying,
Right.
whoever's architect it is,
Right.
they would have to produce that, which helps the situation, knowing that that is true, that they would have to produce that, because otherwise, you're,
What do you think, a simpler definition or
Less is more.
Less
less
is
is more,
yes.
right?
Martha, you're suggesting go with the MDL.
Go with the MDL. If we need to further define, we can do it in the case law, we can do it in the cases. We can always remand for more information if we need to. I think that if we're going to require, certain things, we can do that in the cases.
so here was the question, we asked you to just look into how is seller defined in these various
Yes,
things.
you asked for the, you
So
asked for the different
then,
definitions.
in the definition, you're saying use the MDL's definition, but then make reference to the zoning resolution and
We're not saying, the advice that Martha is giving, and I agree with it, is to stick with the MDL definition. So must not be located in a cellar as defined in MDL 4-4 subparagraph 37.
I mean, curb level, all of that, we can deal with when we have a case in front of us and the professionals have, provided us with the information as to what is curb level,
Okay.
which seems to me that would require some type of survey. But,
And then the board decides that.
So just keep the MDL we have this document, so it's an easy reference for us. I mean, that's basically what the project guidelines was doing, it was pulling
Yeah.
together. So I like that we have it, but I see your point for the rules to just stick with the MDL definition.
Okay.
Just one quick question. The building code, 2008 building code, was that the first time the building code
Overall,
tackled the concept of cellar?
I don't know.
I think the reason that, no, I think the
Can't
reason,
imagine that. It could be.
Well, the question is, Julie could help me out here, but, as I understand it, sometimes people choose to file plans for loft buildings under this code or that code. So I'm just wondering, are there dueling cellar codes in various building codes, cellar definitions in various building codes?
I can tell you that later, but
Yeah, I mean, there probably are, it's
Well, you would use the code.
1938, 1968,
68,
Right.
30,
2008,
Wouldn't you typically use the code that you're going by? That is the code that the building was built within that, even if it was varying from 2008 to 68 to, I think it was 1913. Wouldn't you use the code the building was built under?
It's my understanding that sometimes architects pick the code that suits them best.
Right.
And will try to fly it under that code.
I don't know if it differs between,
I mean,
exactly, but I don't know. definitions.
I know when we research, again, we're just talking out loud, I'm not trying to make any points or anything, but when we research a building, we research it within the realm of the code that it was built under. If I've got a building built in 1927, we're going to refer to the code that would have been in place in 1927, not one that was in place in 1968. So I think it could still vary as long as you're looking at the proper code that the building was erected under.
Oh, I see.
See, I'm not going to reference the 2014 building code for a building that was built in 1927.
That's not gonna help you skate around
No.
ADA stuff, for example.
No, you may be wrong. If you're building a building under the 2008 code, then you're going to use the 2008 definitions.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but not the year the building was built. You mentioned something about the year the building was constructed.
If I,
No, but it hasn't, I'm not talking about there being building going on, I'm talking about the building has not had any work done to it.
Well,
But you have to conform to the building code applicable right now.
if I'm doing a rehab,
If you're doing it, I'm talking about just the building just sitting there,
Oh.
and it hasn't changed, there's no rehab or
Okay.
I mean, I
no work.
Yeah, then you would look back to what code
You
it
would
was
look
built
to
under, right?
what-
Yeah, and particularly
Yeah.
when you look at some of these buildings in the outer boroughs, they get more, it's very simple in Soho and NoHo. But you go to the outer boroughs, the buildings are very different.
Well, I think
So I think we have to take-
honestly, I think where we're gonna run into an issue with this moving forward is as legislation allows more people to live in cellars and or basements, whatever we determine that they are, we're gonna see more and more cases, most likely, that this is applicable.
I mean, I think my thinking, because basement's always the garden and everyone gets to live in those, and row houses, which are the main typology here, that the new law brings us in sync with that. Like a basement, we're allowed to live in it. It was an exception before for some odd reason, but now it's not. The cellar, I don't think anyone's ever been legally allowed to live in a cellar, so there might be like fine hair, this 50% thing where someone gets a
Just for
survey
the
out.
calculation.
That's where
Yeah, it's going to be borderline.
Yeah.
Really borderline.
But that was the same in Build It Back cases. It's just, those are rare, but they'll be out there. So I think there might be nuances, difference of cellars, but primarily I always hear that 1/2 rule is the basement, and so more than half underground is
So
cellar.
we're in agreement, we're gonna go with just the MDL.
Yes.
And we could do anything, we could write 8 pages and still someday there'll be a disagreement among the parties. But I mean, there's no definition we could write that would be.
Cover, yeah. Right. Less is more.
I do like Martha's analogy that less is more in this particular case. Because that way we're not tying ourselves down too tight.
And the board gets to decide these things. We can't do it. All right.
Okay, so the next two notes in the document are footnotes that are on page 145, line 23, and 147, line 4. This footnote, I think we should leave it, and we should leave it as a footnote. What it says is the state legislature made a typographical error in section 281.5 by listing 47th Street as the Long Island City Industrial Business Zone. However, the intended street name is 47th Avenue, not 47th Street, and the board is enacting a rule that says that. So I think we should leave that, and I don't think there's any harm in leaving it as a footnote, unless you feel strongly about it, in which case we'll raise it up.
It was never corrected, I thought
It was corrected too.
Yeah,
Was it?
Yeah, I think
Oh.
so.
yeah, I thought they
If it
did
was
a check.
corrected, then let's,
You
We'll
take
check
a-
to see if it was corrected, but I think it was.
so if it was corrected, then we don't have to worry about it.
Can we do it right now? You want me to? Oh, you can continue.
Okay. All right, so then that would bring us to page 154, line 12. so this is a change to the rule regarding the calculation of residential units for the purposes of counting residential units to determine whether a building qualifies for coverage as an IMD building and must be registered. The unit seeking coverage must meet the criteria set forth in MDL 281 and these rules including 29 RCNY, blah, 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 blah. So this was a change from that you had to have 3 units and each of them had to do it. Each of the units had to meet all of the criteria, and this was a legislative enactment, and the question was, is there anything specific in the legislative history about the seeking coverage change to the law? And my answer was, there's nothing in the legislative history about that specific language. The Assembly memo in support says that the section updates the application requirements for units eligible under the 2008-2009 eligibility period. So that's what the legislative history said.
So can you, what was the issue here that we were?
I think Mr. Carver had raised the issue because the law changed. I'm trying to find my copy. Just give me 1 second to find it. Oh, it's right on the first page. Right, so if you look at the first page.
I don't even know what this is doing here. The AIR and the JL, Joint Living Working Quarters, or they really only apply to, Soho and a little bit to the, but do they apply? They don't apply to the outer boroughs.
I don't know, but there weren't any proposed changes to those sections of the rules except to add 281.6. But we're a little above that. We're not quite at that spot yet. We're on line 12.
Yeah, okay.
Okay? So, where it says the unit seeking coverage must meet the criteria. And I mean, the legislature changed the law, right? Provided that the unit seeking coverage is not located in a cellar and has at least one entrance, blah, blah, blah. So it used to say, provided that the unit is not located in a basement or cellar and has at least. So they added the language seeking coverage. So we are adding the language seeking coverage to the rule. So,
Omitting the word each.
correct. And I think Mr. Carver was concerned about that and wanted to know whether or not there was legislative history on that specific issue, and there wasn't anything on that specific language. But it is a change that the legislature made, and I think that we need to make a change to the rule. So.
They did change.
Oh, okay, so we can eliminate, so Martha found, going back to the footnote, we can eliminate that footnote. Because the legislature changed it.
Yeah, I thought they cleaned that up in the chapter somewhere.
Okay.
So that takes care of 145 and 147.
Right, so that brings us back to the unit seeking coverage on page 154. So I think we're all okay with this?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so now I think, Mr. Barrows, we get to your question, which was about the JLWQs, right? And you wanted to know what the the meaning of JLWQA in the zoning resolution. So I have it here. I think our units, if they were still going to be called JLWQAs, would fall under the zoning resolution under section C, any person who is entitled to occupancy by any other provision of law. So we would have people the provision of law would be the loft law. So do you want to change that section at all, Ms. Barrows?
I think he was asking the question, is it only applicable if you're in Soho or Tribeca? Can you be in Brooklyn and have a,
The thing is, looking down on the sea, I certainly don't know all of these districts, M15A, M15B, M1, I don't know whether they apply to any other area of the city outside of Manhattan.
Right.
Do we know that? Does anybody know that?
I don't think they do.
They probably don't, right?
Yeah.
But for our purposes, do we want to change any of this? Other than to add 281.6 where it should be added, which is on line 16?
I don't see where 281.6 is going to cover any more spaces in Soho, NoHo, or Tribeca.
But would you want to foreclose that possibility?
But what it's doing is it's lifting something up in the air that we have had no concern over all these years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally we would get a requirement from the law department about the artist-only district of Soho, and we've always ignored it. Because it's not under our jurisdiction to make those determinations.
So in terms of the rulemaking, I guess there's two issues on this page. One is on line 16 where we're adding 281.6, so I think you're saying you don't think it's necessary to add it. And the other is on line 20 where we suggested taking out pursuant to the zoning resolution. So
19, I think should stay, even though it's,
pursuant to the zoning resolution, you want to leave it? I'm okay with that.
but the first question is, do we want to expand I mean, it's great you pulled this quote, thank you from zoning, but I don't think we need to include all of it. It's like a reference.
No, I totally agree with that, but I think the issue was, well, we should know what it says before we decide to delete it.
Right, right.
We could certainly keep in pursuant to the zoning resolution.
The question I have about the zoning resolution, in the first paragraph that you quote, consists of one or more rooms in a non-residential building. Hashtag non-residential. But joint living work quarters for artists can be a description of a unit in what has now, through code compliance, become a residential building. So, as a proud amateur when it comes to reading the bloody zoning resolution, this would almost seem to be saying that this definition is only applicable to non-residential buildings. But we know that the Department of Buildings in Soho and NoHo accepts joint living work quarters for artists as a residential unit descriptor in what are now residential buildings with a residential CFO, in lieu of being a Class A multiple dwelling.
So that leans in favor of taking out pursuant to the zoning resolution.
In my small mind, way of looking at it, yeah.
Okay.
Which is what you're proposing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So me know what you want to do, and we'll do it.
Sorry, I get line 19, but you said line 16.
Well, for now, since Chuck just was talking about line 20, let's
Yeah.
stay with line 20, we can go back to 16. So, the proposal for line 20 is to take out pursuant to the zoning resolution, and I think Chuck's argument is that the zoning resolution seems to conflict. The definition in the zoning resolution of JLWQA conflicts with what we're trying to accomplish, because the definition in JLWQA is for buildings in non-residential buildings, but ultimately our buildings become residential buildings or portions thereof. So how could you have something that is defined as a room in a non-residential building and then you get a C of O? Is it still legal? Am I right?
Yeah.
I got the argument, right?
At the time of application though, do you still get anyone applying from Manhattan that under this? Or?
So we do still get, we do still get applications for buildings in Manhattan. Now we are, because the statute of limitations was lifted in June. So we do still get applications for buildings in Manhattan, whether or not they would be in these particular districts where the supplies, I don't know.
We've
But
certainly got buildings that came in under 281.1 that have not yet gotten a certificate of occupancy, that are in Soho and NoHo, where it would be likely that the application would be to have those designated as jointly located.
And I think it's the architects for the owners that actually fill out the Schedule A, right, and say what they want. I don't know that we would object to it if it said JLWQA.
What I don't understand is that this particular section is talking about how to calculate the residential units to determine whether the building is qualified. So what we're talking about here is a non-residential
It's
building.
pre-C of O.
Yes, pre-CFO.
Well,
So it's
even that
not
being the
because-
case, does striking out pursuant to the zoning resolution create a problem?
I'm not sure. Because I don't know where else this particular specific term is defined and whether it would be inconsistent with this definition.
I mean, if
It's
you had,
defined
for
in the
example,
MDL. It's defined in the MDL in 277. I'm sorry. What you're saying?
if you had, for example, a building in Soho that had been, had two joint living quarters for artists, and still had a commercial seal, but rented a unit residentially recently, and had someone apply under 281.6, let's say, hypothetically, and said, well, yeah, those two units, I'm the third unit, this should be an IMD, we wouldn't say,
We would say no.
yeah,
Right. Because this rule says that despite the designation as joint work living quarters, the building could still be an IUD. It would count those two other units that are residentially occupied during the window period, provided they meet the other criteria.
right.
It would be a basis to grant them coverage. Yeah.
Bringing up just another issue, I wonder how many buildings there are in Manhattan that are still done under law from 1981 or 2. Do we know what,
I think there's around 100, I can check, but I think it's around 100. But they're close,
I mean, I
most
don't
of them
want to
are,
change
most
the
of them are
subject
very
here. Don't you
close.
think it's important that we go after
Yes,
those bad buildings and
Yes.
get this thing over with in Manhattan once and for all?
yes, most of them are very close, but I have those statistics and I will bring them.
All right.
Okay, sorry if I'm not as well versed in this, but MDL also defines the joint.
Well, it defines artist, and it talks about joint living room quarters.
In 7B.
7B. Right, so 277 says, a building in any city of more than 1 million people, blah, 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 may, notwithstanding any other article of this chapter or any provision of law covering the same subject matter, be occupied in whole or part for joint living work quarters for artists or general residential purposes if such occupancy is in compliance with this article, and then it goes on to list all of the conditions. So it does use the term,
Right.
and then it defines, 276 actually defines the word artist.
What is, so MDL comes from the state, and
Yeah.
zoning also is the state telling the city that the state.
No, it's zoning city.
The city, but doesn't the state tell the city to do it?
You have to trumps.
State law trumps city zoning, yes. Can trump city zoning.
Well, our role is to be in sync with the state law, telling us what to do. But then, by this, we're warning people there's a zoning definition to be aware of.
If we leave it in there, yeah,
If we leave it in.
yeah.
To me, from the passage you just read in 7B, it's a little vague. Like, they seem like they're referencing zoning. So, I don't know. If we, in our definition section, do we define JLWQA based on zoning?
I think we did. I don't think we did. Let's see.
You know, that
Yeah.
letter that you sent around from the real estate board, they never mentioned living working quarters for artists, they just mentioned living quarters. I mean, even though, I mean, essentially, the law went into effect essentially for the artist. And then, of course, you can't just say that because it's discriminatory. So it got opened up, which I think is the proper thing that happened. And I must say that when I go very often and I look at who's applying for coverage, like put in their names, I mean, they're either artists or they're fellow travelers, or they work in some area of the art world. It still seems to be the case with at least a lot of the people that I tend to look up when I get their thing. So, but what I'm saying is it really doesn't matter at this point.
So I
So I
mean,
don't know, it just leaves me a little befuddled. Why is this in there?
Well, I love live work, so I don't want to cut out a future possibility that
But anything
that
is,
zoning's going to redefine what this
But everything
brings us
is
back to
live work.
life.
well, but there are
Everybody
limits as to
lives-
how much space you can use.
almost everybody
right?
lives, works in their apartment these days. I know when I used to go into Soho, which I would do rather regularly, looking at law spaces. So they tell me it was live work. And I said, well, what does that mean? I mean, today, almost everybody lives and works in their
But there's
in their space.
zoning legally tells you what percentage of
Yeah, but it was specifically for Soho, to some degree NoHo, and for somebody and to small degree Chelsea.
So to the extent that we want to add 281.6 to line 16, I think after the discussion, my inclination is to tell you we should add it because it's true. It may be a remote possibility,
Yeah, I agree. I
but
agree.
let's include it as a unit,
I
right?
agree.
That would count. Is everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that leaves us with line 20 as to whether or not include the zoning resolution or not. So what do you want to do? Just let me know. Say take it out?
I say take it out.
If we take it out, you could read pursuant to the zoning resolution to say that only, if we take it out, it's like, where is this joint live recorded for artists? Well, it's on the C of O, it's in 7B.
Right.
Whereas here we're saying as limited to as expressly as defined in the zoning.
Zoning resolution.
So I
So
think
broadens
you-
it?
I think your vagary
Yeah, it's better.
is,
But is the parentheses, did we establish, how we?
Brackets means you take it out.
we're just your regular, most of the time it's bracketed in the draft that we're working on, it's bracketed and it's struck.
Yeah,
But
I
they
missed that one.
Okay. But are you proposing to say 19, any residential unit designated as joint live work quarters for artists? And then my question is, do you make that bold, like Carver was saying, with all the definitions, we're gonna, every time something's defined somewhere, it's in.
Well, we're not defining this term, right? We're not defining this term, right? So the question is, so it would read, any residential unit designated as joint living work quarters for artists except as provided below in 29 RCNY 2-0D2 apply. Right? So we would take out pursuant to the zoning resolution because that makes it more restrictive. So we want it broader so we can get more units.
So leaving it vague is good to not define? I mean, that seems like if we're defining terms that are not common.
But you have so the JLWQA is used in different contexts. And I think Chuck's point is why should you limit it to just the context of the zoning resolution if you could also include a unit that, let's say, is listed on a C of O as JLWQA. How that would come about, I'm not sure, but.
Because that's tied to zoning, right?
Both of us have been to those Soho, NoHo rezoning thing, and I had spoken to the guy that was running, what's his name, was running the meeting.
Jonathan.
John, yeah, and so then he asked how many people living here, 3 to 5 years, half a dozen hands went up. 5 to 15, 30 hands went up. 15 to 35, 60 hands went up. And what it seems to indicate is that this is now pretty much a closed society.
So then why don't we take it out? So
So,
let's take it out. We okay with taking it out?
Yes.
Okay, and I know we're not always. Okay, so that finishes 154, line 20.
What are you taking out? The
Pursuant to the zoning resolution, yes.
But you're leaving joint living working quarters for artists.
Yes, because we want.
But not
you
But
want-
not defining.
Yes.
Even though we're defining lots of things.
Yes,
And that's on purpose because the MDL's definition is kind of vague and.
we want to be able to include those units as counting toward how many residential units there are for the purposes of coverage. Okay? Okay, 159, line 14. So we had a question about the Board of Estimate. And what happened to the Board of Estimate? And whether or not we should leave if the Board of Estimate or its successor disapproves rezoning, blah, blah, blah. So the question was, is there a singular successor? And it was actually not easy for me to find information, and I am ashamed to say that I looked at a Wikipedia article, because you never know what could be in a Wikipedia article, but what that article said was that the Board of Estimates functions, most of them were transferred to the City Council, but it said most of them. So to the extent that there might have been functions that would be applicable, I think we should leave the text as it is. So,
I suppose the Board of Estimate was declared illegal.
okay, I'll take your word for it.
And that's why it no longer exists.
Okay. But I think to the
Does that
extent,
nullify everything they did?
What?
Does that nullify anything they did?
It should have, but
but to the extent that there may be some functions, since not all of the functions were transferred to the city council, then I think we should leave the language as it is, the Board of Estimate or its successor. So depending on what the functions are, we would have to figure out what is the successor of the Board of Estimate. So I think just leave it.
at least we don't have all of them.
Okay. So we're okay with leaving that?
I don't quite get the full logic. It was hard to find out. Isn't there like a little guy somewhere in the room that, in City Hall that knows this? I mean, are you saying, we're leaving it in because,
We're leaving it in because when the Board of Estimate was disbanded,
yeah.
okay, the issue is, did all of its functions go to one place? If all of its functions went somewhere else, then you could just use the name of wherever it went.
Okay.
But the fact is it seems as if not all of its functions went somewhere else. Most of its functions went to the city council, but not all. So if not all of its functions went to the city council, we want to make sure that we're covering.
All right, I hear that. I'm wondering if after Board of Estimate, you can write in parentheses now defunct or something that lets people know it's no longer an entity. I mean,
I just write, if the one-time Board of Estimate or its successor disapproves.
We could say if the successor to the Board of Estimate disapproves rezoning.
No, it really was not a success. I mean,
Well, it's not a single successor.
Yeah.
I think that's.
It was also taken up by city council.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any other legal entity in the city that took up any other than, I used to testify there all the time.
Board of Estimate.
Yeah.
I mean, can we just I was just thinking let people, like, let's say, not even me, but like a 25-year-old in my office is reading through this stuff. Board of Estimate, they don't know about government. Board of Estimate, what is that? And then they spend a bunch of time trying to figure out, does it exist still? Like, can we just tell people it's defunct so that they don't have to waste time? I mean, I'm just like, I'm thinking from the perspective, like, as citizens need to know more about their government and how it works, and wasting, it's just, there's a lot to dig through to understand.
I don't think it's a big deal to put defunct in parentheses next to it. Just some
I mean,
clarification.
it's minor, but to me, it would save me paying my staff time to figure it out, or
At this point, what the Board of Estimate was is nice to know, but in terms of dealing with city government today, you don't need to know what it is any more than what an alderman is.
Can we just maybe say if there's any disapproval of rezoning for residential use?
I'm okay with that.
All right, just take this whole thing.
Yeah, that's,
Rereading it.
we're actually talking about two possible events, disproving rezoning or extending a deadline. The deadline in this case
Okay.
being, I think, study areas, which is, so, and I think both of those functions are council functions.
Right. But I'm saying we don't have to reference Board of Estimate at all. We should just say if there any disapproval or rezoning for residential use or extension of, just take off if the Board of Estimate and says if there's any disapproval.
well,
So we don't have to say, we don't have to name anyone successor Board of Estimate.
isn't the idea is there's an agency that would be responsible for?
Well, we're pointing to an event, right? So if the Board of Estimate disapproves of rezoning, so our successor. So we could just say if there's any such, right? If there's-
Without saying who does it.
Yeah. Because see what I'm saying? We just take this out. This is a new rule, so we could just.
So we could just say,
We know Board of Estimate doesn't exist anymore. We just take it out altogether.
Yeah.
so I would take
And we come
out,
back.
all right, so we'll take out if the Board of Estimate or its successor disapproves, and put in disapproval rezoning for residential use or grandfathering, or the extension of such deadline.
Seems like we want to say if.
Upon disapproval.
Yes.
Do you,
Right. Line is
Oftentimes
asked.
in code, they talk about is it ADJ? The authority with jurisdiction is the one they use it. Do you know what I'm referring to? I
Sorry.
mean, we're saying there's an entity that has authority to make that call, that disapproval, right? And we usually, is it ADJ? It's like a authority.
Or authority to do something.
Yeah.
Agency with the authority to do
Yeah.
something. I never heard of it.
We use it, it's in all the codes.
How about the AHJ company? Is that a jurisdictional?
Yeah, true.
Okay,
Just
so
as
it's like saying, what is competent jurisdiction? It's the agency of competent jurisdiction or something. Or jurisdiction, such a thing. You can say, you want to say if there's a,
AHJ, yeah. Authority having
what's that say?
Authority having jurisdiction.
Authority having
I mean, that's what
So
we're.
you want to say if the authority having jurisdiction disapproves rezoning
If
for
any.
residential use?
If any authority having jurisdiction.
Yeah.
If any authority having jurisdiction. That's a good one, I never heard of it. But heard it in the legal sense, court of competent jurisdiction.
That leaves us in good shape if the city council has ever found a deal.
Probably does, too. But they do.
Any authority having this,
Any authority having jurisdiction disapproves rezoning for residential use or grandfathering of the extension of such deadline. IND status for such building expires and all the units in such building cease to be covered by Article 7C. I don't anticipate this ever happening, but
but if
Fine.
it does, it's clear.
if it does, we're, yeah.
What we
we're
found.
Next one. 161. We took care of that, right?
No, I think we should finish 208 and start with 201. Okay, 161, line 5, that was the JLWQ, anything again. So I guess we're gonna purposes of occupancy shall be permissible if unit is designated as JLWQ, a zoning district which does not otherwise permit residential uses. Right. So there, I think,
Yeah, that's,
there, I think we need to keep it, right?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, so then that leaves us with 164, line 25. I know this is a large document, but the rest of it all pertains to 164, line 25, which is the inherently incompatible.
165, line 4. Well, we got a couple.
164, line 25. The rest of this document. Oh, 165, line 25.
Yeah, you got a couple.
Yeah.
165s.
So we changed this to just include use group 18 as per the law. But then when we got to line 24 on page 164, it says has or should have a New York City or New York State environmental rating of A or B under section 153 of the New York City Administrative Code, blah, blah, blah. And the question was, well, what are those, how are those terms defined? What is an environmental rating of A or B? And lo and behold, upon research, that section 24-153 was amended and no longer talks about the environmental ratings under A or B. So you have the new text there. We could just talk about, to cross out has or should have. We could cross out New York City or has or should have a New York State environmental rating of A or B, right? And then take out under 24-153 of the administrative code. And I did give you, I gave it to you last time, but I'm redistributed it. Here this is the New York State Code, one-page document for the environmental ratings. Tells you what they are, what A and B are. Which is what it was in the administrative code too, but just so you'll know, that's what we would be doing.
This is 212-1.3.
Yes, 6CRR, New York Code of Rules and Regulations.
So the city 24-153, where you said it was taken out, this is the passage you're giving us is where it was taken out.
This passage is what the state rule is.
This one, no, the one.
Oh, the one above, on page 3 of that document where it says 24-153 emissions of air contaminant environmental ratings. So this is what the section reads now.
Today.
Yeah, this is
And
what
it
it currently
for some
reads.
reason took out.
They took out A and B. They used to list in 24-153, they actually list A and B and define them, but they don't do that anymore. They're just relying on the state.
Okay. So we should just rely on the state. Yeah.
So we're sending people on a wild goose chase.
Pretty much. They won't find it, right?
So your proposal is,
To cross out a New York City or, right? So it would be has or should have, well, it should be A, sorry. Has or should have a New York State environmental rating of A or B. And then take out under section 24-153 of the New York City Administrative Code. And leave the rest.
for any process equipment.
Right. Process, here we have the definition of process. That actually is in 24-153, but it's also in the state. It's also defined in the state. It's the state. Equipment used in a process.
Is it worth writing the New York State rule number?
You can if you want. The problem with doing that is the problem that we're coming up against
With the
now,
city?
which is if they change it, we have to change the rule. Right? If you cross-reference, and then that thing that you this is why I hate cross-references, and that thing that you cross-reference to morphs into something else or is repealed, then where do you go with your rule? And you have to keep on top of that and know that.
That makes good sense.
Given that by the legislature removing use groups 15 to 17, the number of disputes about this is going to be diminished somewhat.
Yes.
It seems that for us to try to pinpoint where things currently are for those buildings where this will be an issue is kind of like trying to play whack-a-mole because they're going to move around, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think here vaguer is better, or non-specific.
Okay. Is everybody okay? Yes?
Yeah, that's good. I'm so glad you researched it because
Yeah.
who wants to have old stuff?
Yeah. I agree. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, we got rid of the Board of Estimate, we got rid of Section 153.
We did not get rid of the Board of Estimates, or someone else did.
Yeah,
Okay.
we got it out of our narrative.
So then you wanted to know what risk management plans were? 65 line. Is or should be required under the Community Right to Know law to file a risk management plan for extremely hazardous substances. So here's what that definition is?
Which commission is this?
Where?
It's just 24/7/18, it says shall file with the commissioner.
DEP.
DEP.
This is their rule.
If it's 24, it's DEP. So are we good with keeping that as is?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
It would be hard to argue that the fact that a building is required to file a risk management plan should be ignored as something that's a factor in considering the compatible use.
For extremely hazardous.
Yeah.
It's really hazardous substances.
I mean, this is like radioactive stuff.
Well, I think it's
Well,
also, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Not radioactive.
Not radioactive. Oh, I thought my recollection. No, like hospital.
Volatile.
Volatile. Okay. All right.
I know this, but jewelry.
Because, maybe because of the flammable, maybe because of the flammable gases in store for that jewelry.
That's what I remember from my old days, like jewelry making was a big one.
Yeah,
Well,
the,
because of the flammable gases, that's what
But
it gives off
the
also.
fumes, yeah, the
Yeah.
fumes, the fumes
But also
and the
hot.
toxins that are given off from the process.
Right. But the risk management plan is what stored there, right? It's basically what's being stored, and what's stored for jewelry making is flammable stuff.
Rich, I have a question. Does propane tank, or
Small ones,
do those count as,
they're like a 14 pounder, they're 1 pound.
16.4 ounce
1 pounder, yeah.
within the living space, you're allowed, I believe, it's either 4 or 6,
It's handheld torches.
16.4 ounce.
So I guess they make that kind of
A
roulette.
whole bunch of them.
Wired to
but if someone was like a commissary that's housing food trucks, and they have a lot of propane?
Oh,
so they
absolutely, yeah, no, absolutely.
They would have to file a risk management.
They probably would have to, yes. Not probably.
They would, okay.
Okay, and that brings us to high hazard group H occupancies, section 307.
Right.
Yeah. Section 307 of the building code. And I do apologize for this is the way, this is the only way I could get it. So, I know this chart is like virtually illegible.
Really?
Maybe I shouldn't say virtually, is.
That's great.
So, I mean, you can kind of make out some of it, but,
Reading the rest of that, you wonder how anything is legal.
yeah. So, do you want to make any changes, or you want to just leave it? And again, this is only going to apply to use group 18 uses. It's not 18. It only applies to uses that fall within 18. That's the only, if it's a high hazard group H occupancy and it's in a 16 or 15, 16 or 17, they could still be covered. It's only the 18s that are.
How is this stuff going to help the board?
Well, I mean, it's
It just
in here
should, it's
now.
just
It
like-
shows-
yeah,
in
it's
determining whether or not something is an inherently incompatible use, right? So the initial question is it use group 18,
Right.
right? So
Then
if
what's
it's
this?
use group 18, then you look to, is it an A or B? Is it
Yeah.
required to have a risk management plan, or is it a high hazard group H occupancy?
Yeah,
So this
but I'm
is the
just
information
wondering-
about high hazard group H.
Yeah,
How is
I
it
love
work?
it, Ronaldo,
You love
because
it?
it's like
You love
it's
it?
first source
If you love it,
information.
that's fine. but
We
I-
just know, and we know now, we're all refreshed, we just educated ourselves,
Right.
thanks to your research, that this is it, so we don't have to make up what hazardous is, but this is, these are the documents.
So I'm just wondering, how is the board going to be looking at this chart, making a decision?
Well, I hope that
We're not.
if we ever have a case where they have to make the decision, we'll have a clearer chart,
Okay.
okay?
And then we will read it.
And that will be legible, or at least we'll reproduce the parts of it that have to be.
But right now, it's legible somewhere, right?
I could not find it. I mean, we could always go to the law library, we could always go to the
Is
library.
this the way it was in our rule now?
This is, it's not in our rules.
Oh, it's not.
And it won't
This
be,
is how it
this
looks.
is just
This I got, I think, from,
this is
here I
code,
say, I think I
but
got this from the DOE's
website, but it should.
Yeah.
be able to
Like the
see-
reference materials in the website, I think that's where I got it.
Yeah, and this is, trying to define these things and decide what was really, should be a concern. This is where Chief Spatafora was invaluable. And we kind of relied on him. And if this is it, if this should be the litmus test, that's what it should. It's really you read what the things are and you're like,
Yeah, I'm sure we can come up
Yeah.
with clear charts in there. That's-
Yeah,
I mean, there must exist a
Yeah.
clearer version of
have the-
If we have to go this
307.1.
chart, I have a feeling we're not going to be allowing this.
If we needed 307.1
Yeah.
to decide a case, I would make sure that it was a clearer chart.
Or we may not even want to go there, right? I mean, it's.
Well,
Yeah, I'll
You have to go
I'll
there.
get a clear copy and email us all.
Yeah,
Just for
Yeah,
reference.
but it's got to be out there somewhere.
So, the other one, for whatever reason, was very clear.
So now it's illegible, but once we get it, it'll still be, for the most part, incomprehensible.
Clear.
Yeah.
Difficult to comprehend, I wouldn't say incomprehensible, but difficult.
All right.
So we're leaving that, yes? Okay. So this is probably
Good time to take a
because
break.
we're just short away,
You're,
so-
we are, we're adjourned for a short break, so, in session, call to order.
Okay, so I think that was everything that we could do in 208. There are still a couple of open issues dealing with registration, but we haven't gotten to that rule yet, so we'll revisit that. So we're going to pick up in 201, where we had left off, which was at 201 D as in David, which is on page 58. So I do want to point out to everybody that most of this rule was already discussed in great detail over a long period of time, and we have proposed several changes which the board said was okay. So really we should be picking up, unless anybody has questions, we should be picking up on page 62, because the other stuff was already discussed. So.
Are you pointing out a certain passage? Or are
Well,
we on
so we
59?
would, on page 62, we would start on line 20, which is where we added material. So this rule, just to give you some context, this rule is the rule, the section of the rules regarding the narrative statement process. And this particular section that begins on page 62, on line 20, would deal with when you don't have to have a narrative statement process, even if the units are newly covered. Okay, and it basically mirrors the rule for 281.5 under the 2015, 2013, and 2010 amendments. So if the owner is at a certain point in the process already, you don't need to have narrative statement conferences, and that's what this section is about. let me know, read through it, let me know if you have any questions, concerns. So for what we're proposing on 62, page 62, line 20 to 63, line 19. Any questions, comments, or is everybody okay? Yeah, I'm still reading. Still reading? Okay.
The first line captures this for building covered as a result of the 2019 amendments.
Mm-hmm.
And then over on page 63, line 14, we refer to chapter 41 of the laws of 2019. But we're talking about the same thing.
Yes.
So wouldn't it make sense to use the same terminology in both instances?
We can do that. The problem is with 281.5, right? Because 281.5 changed in the amendment. So yeah, so we'll say that. So as a result of the 2019 amendments to the loft law, is that what you want?
Well, that's what you have.
No, on page 63.
Oh. If that,
So it covers you better than you'd switch to it.
I mean, what you're really trying to say is 281.5 as amended by,
Right.
and all of 281.6.
So you want to say 281.5 as amended by, you want to say chapter 41 of the laws of 2019?
Well, I guess I first balked at the initial on line 20 of 62 as a result of, seems like an odd way to.
So I'm just mimicking what comes before,
Ah,
right? So if you go back to page 61 on line 13, it says for buildings covered under MDL 281.5 as a result of the 2013 amendments of the law. So I'm just
Right.
moving forward as opposed to redoing redesigning the wheels, so.
So the real thrust of the section is 281.5 buildings as a result of the 2019 amendments and all of 286.
Yes.
So it's just a question of how to say that clear as possible.
Tell me what you want. I'm a member.
Would it be clearer if 281.6 was moved after chapter 41 of the laws of 281-6 of 2019.
Yes. But that doesn't change the,
I don't think it does.
no, I mean, it was fine that you're talking about on page 63, but I think Chuck is first dealing with page 62, the heading on page 62. Do you want to leave the heading on page 62 as it is, or do you want me to change that too? For buildings covered under MDL 281.5 as a result of the 2019 amendments to the Loft law and 281.6?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. We can do that. And then on page 14, do you want to leave it chapter 41 of the laws of 2019, or do you want to make it as a result of the 2019 amendments to the Loft law?
I think it'd be better to mirror what we have.
Yeah, mirror what we
Okay.
had on 62.
Okay. Okay, so on 62, it will say, for buildings covered under MDL section 281.5 as a result of the 2019 amendments to the Loft law and section 281.6. That would be the heading. And then on page 63 on line 14, it would say, well, starting on 13, and the proposed work is solely within the additional units covered under section 281.5 as amended, as a result of, as a result of the 2019 amendments to the Loft law or to section 281.6, additional units. This paragraph 2 only applies to the occupants of the additional units. So if you're a new unit, right, so everybody else theoretically would have already gone through a narrative statement. So if you're a newly covered unit, you still have a right to go through a narrative statement, but you can't necessarily comment on everything.
You can't comment on the hallways or the room.
Right.
If there's a permit in effect, but if there's not,
Well, it's different conditions, right? If there's a permit, if there's a TCO, et cetera. So there are different conditions as to when you can and cannot have a narrative statement or comment.
and you said this just mimics what was.
It mimics what was there for the section before.
Okay.
So the theory being I'm a new unit added to a building that's already gone through the narrative statement process. And therefore, the narrative statement process in my right to comment is limited to the plans for my unit.
Yes.
Well,
Well, I don't know.
I mean, if there was like a parking space or something that
Oh,
was
don't
tied
drive
to,
in.
sorry, something that's specific to looking at outside of the space the unit.
That was something new.
Right.
There's something new.
So, everybody okay with this as changed? Okay, so the rest, moving forward, so between 63 and 68, these are all, again, things that were discussed ad nauseum, and, you know, they deal with the different ways to serve and getting us to an electronic age, please, hopefully soon. And that would bring us to,
I'm sorry.
it's okay.
Yes, on 63, very last line, 29. You've got valid and email address. as opposed
Current
to-
and valid email address, yes, okay.
And valid email address.
Current and valid email address, take out the and.
Right.
Yep.
And 2 lines above that, to be performed should be struck. It's in brackets, but it's not. Yeah, struck.
Yes, yes, yes. So the next substantive thing to discuss is on page 68, line 24. Does anybody have anything else in between?
Yes, I have an insight to this thing that's been bothering me since the
Yeah.
first time it came up. Page 65, line 2. We refer to an alternation application.
Oh,
We have to define that one.
Alternation? Aggregation application.
alteration.
Yeah. And then on 66, line 13, this is now new 7, and it refers to subparagraph 5, but I think maybe it's now 6.
Yes. Yep. And there should be 6 on the bottom also.
And going back up to private delivery service, which I know we've included in a number of places.
Right.
We say that proof involves a copy of a receipt showing acceptance by the delivery service. I was just wondering whether we should also include a tracking number, if there is one, which would,
I don't know, I mean, because we're accepting first class mail, a certificate of mailing. So that doesn't necessarily have a tracking number, so why would we want to do it for the private delivery service?
excuse me, have you ever had the experience where the tracking number says it was delivered to you and it never got delivered?
But that's for verification, though, right? We use that. If for example, if they provide an affidavit of service, right? Mailing, and we find that it's true, then we can always ask for that. For verification.
Okay.
And a receipt.
Right. Okay, anything else between, up to 68, bottom of 68?
Bear with me one second. Six plus.
It's a question of what's proof of this.
Sure.
Sorry, go ahead.
66, line 20, we refer to subparagraph 5.
Yeah, I just said that, yeah.
I think that's a 6
Six.
as well.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. Yeah, the new language on 66, 25 to 27. Can you just explain your thinking there?
I'm curious, the word loft is crossed out there. Board, many times loft board is used. Board.
So we tried to distinguish between board and staff, and board is actually a defined term that means the loft board, so we're crossing out loft, because it just needs to say the board.
But then,
The board is you, it's defined.
As
but
opposed to,
then you have to use loft board elsewhere.
We're crossing out wherever it occurs, we're taking out the word loft, because board is defined.
No, in some instances you haven't done it.
So if we haven't, then we
Then you should.
find them and should,
well,
yes.
for
Oh,
example,
okay.
page 67, line 5, you would say that that's appropriate to say loft board representative, because that's indicating
It's that.
someone other than,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, if you
Yeah.
find it where you should be referring to the board, then
Well, I mean, I
not.
didn't,
if you happen to come across it when you're reading,
Yeah,
just
okay, I
keep
mean,
track
I
of it and let us know, but I'll do a global search and replace.
you know, because sometimes you stop me, and rightfully so, making a point about all these semicolons really should be commas.
it's only when you're being irritating.
This is just stuff that I need to know.
Well, then,
So anyway, to answer your question, Chuck, the language on the bottom, on 25, 26, on 66, page 66, 25, 26, 27, that's actually not new language. It's moved from somewhere else, because I tried to rearrange the flow of this section, as well as make the changes that the board wanted. So that language actually already existed there. So let's say the tenant, because there was already a permit or whatever, normally isn't entitled to have a narrative statement conference
Right.
under those circumstances. That doesn't mean that if they don't want one, we wouldn't let them have one, right? So this just reaffirms that if everybody agrees that they want one, we will certainly hold the conference.
and in its current location, it applies to the narrative statement conference, regardless of under which trigger it's being conducted.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
right.
Does the and there mean that they both have to agree? Or could we do it just on the request of one side?
It shouldn't be.
I don't think it would preclude us doing on the request of one side, but certainly if both
So-
sides want it, we should do
So it
it.
should be or.
Yeah, it should be or.
But just for the request, you're gonna do it, or are you gonna need a consensus? Just by request?
This is one owner, well, it could be more than one occupant, if there's more than newly covered occupants. Newly covered units, I mean. I'm sorry, say that again?
I'm saying, is it automatic upon request? I know it's May, but still, are we gonna?
Right.
Is it-
I mean, there are times when we've said, no, we're not doing a conference, we do phone calls instead, or whatever.
But you're saying you would be considered
If
and
one
would be
side-
granted if one side asked.
Yeah,
If I write a letter as a tenant saying, I think that we should schedule a conference for this reason, and you decline to do so, does that trigger an administrative termination?
yes. I don't know, that. Yes. If we sent a response saying, we're not holding a conference, I think
Just by your request.
yeah, then yes,
That would be.
that would be considered an administrative.
I just triggered something. The idea that we have, that we often talk in this office about legalization conferences to talk about progress of legalization, but there's not necessarily a narrative statement involved.
Right.
I mean, I guess there is if there was one filed a long time ago, but should we say narrative statement conference and legalization conference? I mean,
I don't think we need to say it here because we have, I think at the beginning, that we can request information and call people in. So I think we have that actually, I believe in
Like
chapter
a more
1
broad-
somewhere, right?
No, the chapter 1 talks about the applications. This is outside of the context of the application. You know, it says that we can conduct informal conferences regarding the claims raised in an application. But I guess I'm thinking more broadly. If we want to just general legalization progress, because I haven't heard from you in a long time.
I don't know that that would go here.
Right, no, just broadly. We should think
Okay,
about
so
adding
let's think
something.
about adding something, maybe in chapter, I think it would be better in chapter 1, yeah. Yeah, let's think about adding something to chapter 1.
Can you just,
My thought process?
oh, I know where your thought process. But can you just kind of summarize what you see the issue to be?
The issue, there are times when we are asked by the owners and tenants to have to schedule a meeting about perhaps what we see as a legalization issue. Not necessarily connected to a narrative statement, but something happens in the legalization process that perhaps merits a conversation. I'm not saying we don't have the authority to call people in, but perhaps saying it plainly and more
Like this
broadly.
gas issue.
Gas issue. Well, yeah.
Well, the gas issues
Would
or,
that would trigger an application, that should trigger a narrative statement, but something more general.
I think a lot of times when we see those issues, there's miscommunication or a not nice communication, sometimes between contractors and tenants. So tenants get very upset, and rightly so, and so we will try and bring the owner in and the tenant in to kind of smooth things over and say we need to move forward.
Right, but it's not.
But it's
a
not
narrative statement.
necessarily a narrative statement.
Okay.
Right.
But it's definitely a legalization issue.
I don't want to get sidetracked, but it reminds me of a question. Tenant protection plan is part of the process. Does that get presented to both sides so they understand? Or is it just posted?
Actually, that's in the law that the tenant protection plan has to be distributed or made available.
Distributed, like just.
I didn't say, I'm sorry, I didn't say distributed,
Okay.
I'm correcting myself. Have to be made available. I think it's in the law. It is not, it is in the law for every job, of course, from the DOB.
DOB, right?
Are you talking the same tenant protection plan?
Yeah, because I could, that tenant protection plan in theory would handle a lot, it would give information to all sides, including the contractor on what's supposed to be.
They have a lot to be desired in this tenant protection plan. I think the law now has changed to kind of explicitly state what needs to be inside of those plans nowadays, but there were lackings, about specificity.
Specificity.
Yeah, I'm going through it on a co-op building and I'm gonna report what I have
Yeah.
to file because I'm curious, right, it could be as vague as a
But
paragraph.
they,
or-
if you check out the new law, I think it was 2 years ago, that was a
was passed, they added some.
Could you distribute that?
Yeah, it's,
The DOB?
these DOBs, yeah.
Oh, it's a local law, right?
It's local.
Can I also just say that our changes here will require the owners to electronically send plans to tenants, and I think since the tenant protection plan is part of the
Yes, it's
legalization
part of
plans, they would get it that way as well, if they're providing an email address.
Okay. Now that you've clarified where you're taking the word loft out from loft board, and that it harks back to the definition, having looked at the definition, I think it would be I think you're missing a couple of words there in that case. Because it just reads, board means the loft board established pursuant, so that doesn't.
Where are you talking?
In the definition section on
Page
page
3,
3.
line 10.
You mean you don't have two sections, 282 of the New York State Dwelling Law?
Yeah, but that, you've now come up with a construct with which I don't disagree, that if you're talking about the behavior of an individual who works for the loft board, it's loft board representative. But what you're now saying, when you say board as a standalone, you're really saying an action or policy approved by the members of it. And I would not.
But that's what established, that is what 282 establishes. This board.
282 establishes the board, but I don't think the definition is as clear as it could be to.
How do you suggest changing it to make it clearer?
So, if you remember, you see it has a loft board there. So the board means the loft board maybe as established? Maybe as?
Or Chuck, what if you added a sentence after that just says loft board representative is the staff at that same
I
spot?
don't know, I think loft board should be in every time.
Unless we have another.
We actually have a definition of staff. And really where we have loft board representative, it should say staff.
I mean, but do you work for the board or you work for the loft board?
The staff works for the board.
For the loft board,
Well,
but
what's the board?
the board is, the loft board is established.
The board is the loft board, so the board itself is a non-entity as far as we're concerned. What's the board?
The board, we're redefining board here to mean the loft board. I understand.
How can we look at page 3 again?
What's the harm in saying loft?
No, because it's so everybody talks about the loft board.
You want to separate out the actions of the members of the loft board,
Which
right?
is you.
Which is you guys,
and-
from the members of the
So-
staff of the loft
Got it, got
board.
it.
So that was the idea behind it, was to say board when you meant you,
Because people always
right?
talk
And to
about
say staff when
Let's
we
make it
meant
But maybe.
So,
I guess we are, the members are the board.
correct. And the
Okay.
board speaks in one
Okay.
voice, right? So that's why it's board,
Okay.
right?
Then perhaps it's as simple as on page 3, board means
members.
members of the
That's
loft
the-
board or
that is-
actions taken by the members of the loft board.
No,
No, because it's not just members, it's collectively.
it's a collective
It's collective
action.
action. It's not just.
Right, like when,
So
so
now
for,
what are we going to do?
No.
let's say we have a decision, a case, where the board decides in a 5-4 decision, okay? That is still a board decision,
Right.
Not all of the members agreed to that decision, but it is still a board decision. So it has to be board as one body.
I agree, okay.
Okay. So going back to page 67.
I'm still.
Go ahead.
I register my concern that the distinction you're drawing is nuanced in a way that I'm not sure is still crystal clear.
From this definition, you mean?
Yeah.
The
As opposed to
definition on
the
page
board
3.
and the members of the board, or the board and the staff?
Board and staff, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
That's right, so you say
Board and the staff.
see staff definition written into the board thing, so that someone knows to go to the staff.
But there again, staff means the staff designated pursuant to 282 to carry out the functions of the board. The first person who arrives opens the door with a key, which is not a function of the board. We never adopted a rule that says, here's who's going to open the door.
Miss something.
You want to take out designated pursuant to 282?
Yeah, that's
Okay, so we'll take, so from the definition of staff, which is on page 9, the staff designated to carry out the functions of the board,
What page?
9.
I'm sorry, were we satisfied with number, page 3?
No.
We not?
No, but we
All right, let's
digress.
go back. Sorry, staff.
So staff, the suggestion is to take, to make it, staff means the staff designated to carry out the functions of the board.
Yeah.
Designate?
So here, just,
Hired? We gotta have to.
Yeah, it's not
so
designated.
just for example, page
Doesn't have such
23.
staff.
Just for example, page 23, service of the answer. Prior to filing the answer with the Loft board,
Well, that should be.
it doesn't say board.
Well, that's the law court. And I'm sorry, you filed, but
So now you're telling me we got three entities. We got the board, which
No.
means the members, or the board.
the board itself.
We got Loft
The
board.
deciders. Right, the board.
Then where we say,
Should be board. Prior to filing an answer with the board.
board.
Or we could say staff. We could put staff there.
Oh, we did.
They're filing at the
Offices of the
Offices
board,
of the
right?
board, yeah.
Filing at the offices of the
Of the
board.
board, yeah. I'm sorry, we interrupted.
Prior to filing an answer with the office of the board.
The board.
It seems to me
The board.
you're getting into more trouble here in trying
But
to.
I think we're making too much of it, right? So just file an answer, you filing, where are you reading it? I'm sorry.
Page 23, line 13, I just picked that at random out of any.
I'm sorry, lawyers can do better than you, but I'm just saying.
Not
Number,
necessarily.
what number?
Prior to filing the answer with the Loft board offices, office.
What? Oh, yeah. Prior to filing an answer with the law. So it's just,
Yeah.
you know, there's only one place you can file with the board, right? And it's the staff that's hired by the law, well, not hired, but designated by the board to carry the functions of the board. So you're filing with the board. I don't think there's going to be any confusion there. Nobody's going to come to your personal homes or even here at the meeting places to file with the board. They're going to file at the offices that accepts stuff on your behalf. Unfortunately.
But I will go through where it says Loft board. I'll go through where it says Loft board everywhere and make sure that it should be
But-
board with a capital B or staff.
But you agree, we should take up Loft
Yeah.
from that word from there, right? And then, can we go back to 3?
Yes.
line 10. So could we just say what we had agreed on there? Loft board means,
The Loft Board as established pursuant to section 282 of the New York State Multiple Employment Law. So far, that's where we got in the
I
discussion.
think
I'm not
that's
sure
fine,
that's
but there was
what we did.
another, we went to staff.
We went to page 9. Staff means the staff designated to carry out the functions of the board.
And I was just suggesting under the board definition, you could just say
See
see
also
staff.
staff or something.
Yeah, see staff definition. Just so
Okay.
right away people understand the nuance that you're trying to make clear.
Okay.
Because I don't, most people wouldn't look in a dictionary for staff.
See, when I read board, I took it to mean loft board rather than rent guidelines board. But
In these rules, that's what it should be, yeah.
But now that as we stumble down it on page wherever we are,
67?
yeah.
I need to come back to 9, but just go, we were 67.
Okay, I'll reserve the right to be an irritant at this time.
No, you reserve the right to do it right now, go ahead.
Well, I don't know if I can clear it up right now, because now that I understand what you're trying to do,
Okay, you may have it.
so when I trip over places where I don't know that you've done it,
Okay.
I will make note of it.
Good, okay.
I appreciate that.
I
So-
think I like the idea of trying to do this because
It's very confusing for people. It really is. Who do I have to go to? Do I need to go to the board? Do I need to go to the staff's offices? It's very confusing, so we are trying to clarify it as best as
What
we
is the
can.
confusion?
Because does loft board mean the loft board, or does loft board mean the loft board's staff?
who are actually lawyers. that-
Who are,
thing
right,
is-
who are not the board members?
I think the state legislation just meant the members of the board. The city, on the other hand, put this thing together with the staff.
Can I just,
No, I think
Am I right?
no, I think the
No,
legislation set includes the staff.
it-
It does,
It
yeah.
does?
282 says that the board can hire staff.
Necessary to carry
Carry
out
out
the
the
Oh,
function.
does it say
It
that?
does say that.
Yeah.
Okay,
can I,
I'm sorry I brought this up.
But of course, the
I
board,
need to go back to
the
something.
board does not make hirings. Just saying.
No.
Right.
So that's where,
But the staff that are hired to carry out your functions, right?
you see my point.
I got you. But can I just go back to page 9,
Yeah.
line 6? I don't like the word, I don't like when you use two words to define another, same word to define something. So staff means personnel or persons designated? Can we just do that? I mean, staff means staff.
The people? How about people?
The
They're people.
The people?
Individuals?
No, no, the
Individuals?
people. Yeah.
Employees?
No, no, no,
Employees?
no. Staff means, what's wrong with the word personnel?
Personnel is good.
Yeah. Because you get people already.
Yeah, yeah.
And then let's go back to page 3, line 10 again. And the board means, can we just say the loft board, the board means the loft board, the members,
The voting member.
the decide,
No.
no?
It doesn't mean the voting
No, 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 not the
members.
voting members, no. It's the, sorry.
Collective, it's the collective.
Could we just say that this decision, deciders, board means the,
No, the board itself is an entity
Yeah, board is
that
the
takes
jurisdictional
action.
body.
Yeah.
Right.
How about the board means members and staff that comprise?
It's
No,
just
no,
a-
no, 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 you want to separate staff.
Shouldn't it just be the board, it represents the New York City Board as designated by blah, 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 blah. Like, we're going way too deep into this.
yeah. I don't think, I think what we're doing it still, but I think it's clear. I mean, but I was going to say, decision,
The decision-making body
Body.
established pursuant to?
yeah, decision-making body. Yeah, I mean, is that okay? The board means the decision-making body is established pursuant to.
Established pursuant to section 282 of the New York State. Yeah, I'm not sure that'll fly with the law department, but we'll try.
I mean, does everybody think that's better though before we go on?
Do you want to just say body?
The body?
Body established
The body.
pursuant to.
Okay.
The body.
No.
Okay, whatever the law department thinks, we'll go with that, right? But at least it's clear, right? That we know what we're talking about now?
Yes.
Okay.
Or what you're trying to.
Okay, great.
Okay. So on 67 on line 5, we'll change Loft Board representative to staff. Okay? So information or responses to questions provided by the staff are advisory only and should not be relied, blah, blah, blah.
Where are you?
On 67, where it says Loft Board representative, we're going to change that to staff, which is what it should be. On line 5.
The staff,
Yeah,
take out loft board.
Loft Board representative. Yeah. Well, we could say staff representative, but that seems redundant to me.
Well, I think actually it should not necessarily be relied upon, because we do rely upon the staff.
No. This is when staff members are at narrative statement conferences and we say things, right? So we want people to understand that they can't necessarily rely on everything that we say, that they have a right to hire outside professionals and they should rely on their outside professionals. Right? Like if somebody asked me a question, well, the tenant, or even an owner, it could be either side, asked me a question in a narrative statement conference, what are my rights? I would have to say to them, I can't give you legal advice. You need to go
To
a lawyer, right? I'm not allowed to do that. I'm supposed to be in the middle.
Okay, so
So,
67, you got loft board representative on lines 1 and 2, and again on line 5.
okay, so we're going to change that. Staff.
The staff was,
Yeah.
by the staff are advisory only.
Mhm.
Line 14, fully is bracket, right? Just
Yeah.
strikes it.
Yeah. 67. 67 line, on page 67, line 14, I have fully in brackets and I didn't strike that.
Okay, but it's fully bracketed.
Fully is bracket.
Fully bracketed.
17 is staff again.
Yes.
Okay, and what are you going to do with 27?
I'm going to take out loft.
The theory being that even though the board members have been to the narrative statement conference, it's a process that's been authorized.
Well, also, I mean, somebody could file an unreasonable interference application as a result of the narrative statement process.
So that'll be
Or
in-
that would come to the board. for
In any
decision.
board proceeding.
Yeah.
67 all the way up to top, did we cover that already? Line 5?
Yeah,
We did?
yeah, I'm gonna make that step. Oh, actually, it's also on 13. 13, 14.
Look at 68, line 18.
I just saw it. Authorized by staff. You know, these are sections that I just carried over, so I did not look carefully.
So
I didn't-
authorized by the staff, may file comments with the board. Right? 18, line 18.
Yes.
Take out the word law.
Yes.
And down on 22.
You get into it.
I'm not seeing well, but that's, yes.
You know, for
Oh, I
the
didn't
board,
get it.
is
Took my
obvious.
glasses off, and I'm wondering why I can't see.
Board.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask on line 24, the highlighted passage.
So this is a section that's still open for discussion, if you see the comment on the next page.
Yeah.
So if we are there, then we should talk about it now. So the suggestion was
The
that,
staff and the board have arrived and
yeah,
simultaneously.
simultaneously. So the issue arose as to, like right now, everybody gets a certain amount of time to comment whether or not the building is 3 units or 95 units. And the proposal was that we have some sort of a sliding scale. And I think everybody was kind of in favor of the sliding scale, but we didn't know what it should be, and we kind of left it and went on to other things.
The scale's only for the alternate plan.
Yeah. How long you have to file alternate plan application or comments. So the competing interests are, you want to make sure that the tenants have a fair amount of time, particularly in a large building, to be able to get their plans together. On the other hand, the owner theoretically is under code compliance deadlines. It's actually probably more relevant now because we'll have 281-6 buildings, right? So the owner is under code compliance deadlines, and some of those go very fast. So you have to, those are the competing interests. So how much time are you going to give? Like you couldn't give necessarily 6 months for the tenants to file alternate plans if the owner only has 6 months to file an alteration application. So, well, although, no, to pull a permit, right? Because they would have already filed an alteration application for us to be in the narrative statement process. So those are the competing interests.
Yeah.
So I think everybody agrees that there should be some scale. What that should be, I leave to you. This was just language, these were like
And
placeholder
it's just that it
language.
was filed, like you just perceive that it went in, it's not being reviewed by them, it's just proof that it was sent in, the paperwork was sent in.
For this particular section, yes.
Yeah.
Then there are additional sections that deal with the amount of time they have to clear objections on the alternate plan.
You know, there's this, I mean, it'd be good if Ronaldo's in, there's this DOB now stuff, right?
Yes.
That is really, it's towards going green and
Yes.
electrified, but it, right now, it's like, there's so many applications for one filing that it's, very time consuming.
DOB now.
Is it a matter of, I'm sorry, I missed the first part of that.
Yeah, I was wondering if you were there, but
Is it a matter of just
learning curve, and then it'll be back to normal. Right? Currently,
Yeah.
we have a strange moment where we're all suffering, whoever's filing, because just for the other board members that don't know, when you're filing now, so an architect files the old school plans, but a structural engineer, mechanical, plumbing, boilers, sprinklers, all have to be filed separately electronically. And so then you have multiple filings on each building that examiners all have to like cross-reference. So you could have like 5 filings for one project because they're trying to transition to being paperless. And it's
Do you think, I don't mean to generate comment, things now, but feedback, but do you think in the long run though, it will kind of improve or take with, be better than coming into the
Yeah, I
office?
think it's great to go green. Electronic is just the current, the way they're piecemealing it.
Yeah,
is adding a new layer of complexity that makes it harder to control. So it's fine if something is just in, like let's say the alternate plan, the architect filing is in, because that's the old school way. But if there's also structural and sprinkler filings needed in an alternate plan, they don't look at it until you have everything dotted and crossed inside the electronic files. I'm just saying, that's like the reality on the street right now for filing, or today.
Yeah, let's talk offline.
It might be a non-issue by the time all the rules
Probably.
pass.
Well, maybe, let's hope not. Because that would be a long time.
Well, no, hopefully by next year we're all fine with everything.
We're supposed to be done next month.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of this sliding scale, so what we have written down here, and again, they're just placeholders, right? For buildings containing 1 to 50 registered IMD units, 45 days. For buildings containing 51 or more, 60 days. Whatever you want to do.
Let's review where we are here. In buildings where the owner and the tenants are getting along, and the owner is not rushing for fear of being out of code compliance, the narrative statement process can go on for quite some time. Correct.
Well, if I usually call it playing nice in the sandbox, so if everybody's playing nice in the sandbox, then usually it's fairly straightforward and it doesn't go on for a long time. It's when there's a lot of people involved, is one scenario, right? So
Bigger
even-
sandbox.
Yeah, bigger sandbox, right, or a lot more people playing in it, I guess. So when there's a lot more people involved, obviously it's going to take longer, or if it's contentious.
But what we're looking at now with regard to this question of how long for filing alternate plans, that only comes into play once the staff member says, okay, we're starting the clock for this.
Yes.
And the period from the first narrative statement conference to the point where the staff member says we're starting the clock could be weeks or months or even conceivably years.
It could be,
Yeah, okay.
yes.
So there's no time hammer on either side imposed by the board until this clock starts, because there is some dispute that hasn't been resolved, and that gives the tenants time to file an alternate plan.
Yes, however, the law does contain code compliance deadlines, so the owners
Right.
are under the gun for the code compliance deadlines.
Potentially.
Yes.
Right. And they're under the gun for the code compliance deadline because either A, the tenants might choose to withhold rent, or B, the loft board or the tenants could file for a finding of non-compliance, making the owner subject to fines and lawsuits.
Right, it could be subject to enforcement.
But that's all kind of open-ended. There's no internal clock that we have for that period of the process.
For the narrative statement process?
Yeah.
No, there's not.
Right, okay. So now we get to the point where the issue before us that's highlighted is, should there be different periods of time for larger buildings to get to put together an alternate plan?
Right.
Right. And it seems to me, I was one of the people who argued for this, and I'm in agreement with it. I think 51 is too high a number. I would propose 20. And the theory being that I think there were at most 2 or 3 buildings under the original loft law that had more than 873 Broadway, 303 Park Avenue South. There were very few that had more than a dozen units. So the narrative statement was conceived for 3 to 12, with 18 being an outlier. Now we routinely see buildings with higher numbers, and I think the complexity, anytime you get over about 20 units, I think that's where you're going to have a larger number of issues to sort out. So I would advocate on line 27, reducing that to 20 or 21 from 50 or 51.
So I'm going to ask for, as far as possible, input, because I think you're in the best situation to tell us, you know, is there a breaking point, right, where plans become much more complex because of the size of the building or the number of units?
I mean, it's interesting, I was thinking about it, I agree that I think 50 sounds too high, because I don't know that many 50-unit buildings, 50 IMD unit buildings. Sounds really high. The complexity is also, because you have protected occupants now, it's like how many people are involved.
Right.
The people, there could be like 5 people in one apartment, and so an architect having to touch base with each one and get consent, you know, like that is also complex, and that would be complicated if it was 12 units that each had 4 people rather than 12 units that had one stakeholder.
So do you think 20
So-
is the right number, or do you think it should be lower?
I mean, I would push it back on you too. I mean, I could picture somewhere around 12 or something, but I don't know what you're seeing, what your projects, on average, like how many units. I've always heard that 2010 had bigger buildings than Soho. It was like 3, right?
Yeah.
Like 3 was the norm.
3 to 5, I think.
The
is
average,
early
the average
buildings.
of the original buildings ended up being right around 6.
Yeah.
6, so if we double that to 12, you know, I just don't know if it's 12 or 20, but 50 seems really high.
But there are several buildings that have lots of people.
What's that?
Oh, yeah, I mean, we have buildings with
Yeah, yeah.
95, we have buildings with 87, we have buildings
Yeah, yeah,
with 40, I mean, we do have.
Sure.
Not that they're all following all.
Right, but I'd say a lot of the buildings, probably like in East Williamsburg, tend to be larger buildings. Those industrial buildings have 3 to 4 stories that have probably about 60 to 80 apartments within each of them. Now, all the ones that you see, Kibben and Moore Street and all of that, those are large buildings. So just giving you some, on those.
Yeah, I don't know, because I think we had some cases recently where some floors were commercial and some were residential. So I don't really know whether lots of buildings.
Why did you say 20?
Obviously, there's no perfect number.
It doesn't also, it doesn't have to be just 2 groups, we could have 3 groups.
I remember suggesting that maybe there'd be, say, 0 to 20, 20 to 40, 40 up, and maybe then it would be 45, 60, 75, something like that. It would strike me to be more realistic with the knowledge that, yeah, you can have a 4-unit building that has a couple of difficult tenants, an owner with a crazy owner with a crazy architect. So,
Can we, yeah, this is completely unscientific for me, but can we say 1 to 15, 16 to 30, and 31 up?
fine with that.
Yeah, and it's 15 days more each time. One other thing, I think that sounds more
15 to, wait, so
16,
1 to 15 is 45 days, 15 to 30, 16 to 30
and then 31.
is 60 days, and 31 or more is 75 days.
I mean, it brings up 2 questions to me. One, when I was talking to you about DOB now and the separate filings, when it mentions alternate plan, and it's just for me technically, to me it's an architect's plan. It's not all the engineered drawings and all the coordination of, because it's just an architect, tenant architect, putting a plan in and getting a reaction. They're not hiring sprinkler engineer.
I think it depends on the issue. So, we've had alternate plans where it was just plumbing riser diagrams. We've had alternate plans where we had mechanical plans because it was gas issues. And that was an engineer.
Oh, so everything else was resolved
So-
except for that one.
Well, usually when they're filing an alternate plan, they're filing it for a specific issue, right? So the idea is we've gotten rid of, right, we've reached consensus on as much as we possibly could,
Okay,
and then here's what's outstanding.
okay,
And the alternate plan is just filed on what's outstanding.
okay.
So usually, I can't guarantee that there won't come a time where it's broader, but usually they're very narrow in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. So what it would consist of, I think, is going to be different depending on the nature of the issue. Like one of the things that I think we'll see getting back to the gas lines, right, is we
Right.
may see alternate plans involving gas lines versus electric heating. We have one of those right now, so. Okay, so we'll redraft on the bottom of page 68 to put in those parameters. And then on the top of 69, I don't think I drafted it particularly well, but I think the thought behind it is to allow for an additional 30 days if there are extraordinary circumstances. I'm not sure why it says upon application by an occupant. The way that it's drafted now is that the request has to come from the occupant.
There is such an application for the late filing of alternate plans.
Oh, okay, okay. So that would be,
You're questioning why the word occupant.
I'm questioning why
It's an application.
I mean, I did this a long time ago, so I'm questioning why I just made it applicant driven as opposed to either side.
Well, the tenant's trying to get together their alternate plan,
Yeah,
so that
right, okay.
would be hard to imagine the owner
Yeah.
saying, give the tenant more time.
And by saying occupant, it could be a protected occupant or not? I
I mean,
mean,
usually it's protected occupants. I mean, it could theoretically be a non-protected occupant, I guess. Because non-protected occupants do actually come to narrative statement conferences because the rule says notify everybody.
Can we just, on that first line 1 on page 69,
Yeah.
could we kind of separate those B and A, maybe make, return P or something, put A.
Put A on the next line?
Yeah, something. Because B
Yes.
seems like it's a separate part of it.
Yes.
A seems separate.
Yes, I'll separate those.
And then what we mean by A,
So it's down here, if you go back. That actually is going to be A, B, and C, right? Because we're going to add a C. So that refers back to here, right? B, A, and B. On the bottom it says C8.
so it says A or B.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so which grade is
It's
this?
right there.
Oh, these days.
Right.
Oh, so maybe it's just a space you need then? Section B, A or B? Oh, yes.
It's going to be A, B, and C, because we have to change.
Oh, so it's right then.
We should talk about application now. We'll make a request.
A request filed prior to the expiration of the time period stated in section B, A, B, or C, the executive director may extend the deadline for an additional 30 days. Okay, yeah, we can just say if the occupant demonstrates extraordinary circumstances, you can take out upon application by an occupant, right? If the occupant demonstrates extraordinary circumstances, demonstrates that extraordinary circumstances prevented the occupant from filing an alternate plan application or comments. That would work.
So I'm wrong then when
is, yeah.
So it's fine. Okay.
Okay,
All right. You got
Yes.
C,
I
right?
have to add C, yeah.
All right.
But I have to change the other one first, so.
The next section, lines 7 through 14, I realize it's not new, it's existing, but reading it anew struck me that it's
Strange.
not elegant in its drafting.
Okay.
Lines 13, 14, like the last sentence is strange.
Two or more occupants may file a joint alternate plan application describing their alternate plan. I mean, we could just end it at, may file a joint alternate plan application, period.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the first question is, the initial thought is if the alternate plan is required to be filed with DOB because it requires DOB review.
Mm-hmm,
That posits that we could have an alternate plan that doesn't require DOB.
mm-hmm,
Have we in fact run across that?
yes,
Okay. Okay.
that's what it is. Didn't see in this, yeah, yes.
So,
What would that case be where it doesn't need to?
So, the issue, the case that I'm thinking of, the issue was that the owner wanted to put X number of units, the owner bought out everybody on the fourth floor of the building and wanted to put X number of units, residential units on the fourth floor of the building, and the tenants only wanted 7 units. So, it didn't have to go to DOB for review, because the issue was the owner allowed to have more than 7 units? Right, there was no, they didn't have to draft an alternate plan to show only 7 units, right? They filed comments saying this is going to unreasonably interfere with our use because X, Y, and Z.
And then you listen to their argument.
So they
So
filed,
you settle that.
so there's 2 different ways it could go. If a fact finding is required, then it would go to oath for a hearing. In that case, everybody agreed on the facts, so then it goes to the executive director for a determination. And that is appealable to the board. That determination is appealable to the board.
Okay.
So it depends on what it is they want.
and the lines regarding, we say either an engineer or a licensed plumber retained by the occupant, then we feel the need to specify that the person who retained the professional is responsible for any required fees on the theory that I'm going to try to stick it on the owner.
This is how it reads.
Right.
You know, my assumption is that when these rules were drafted, whoever was drafting it wanted to make it clear to tenants who were contemplating filing alternate plans that they would be bearing the expense, and that they should know that up front. I think it's good that it says that, because it tells them that.
But maybe it could be in one sense at the end. It goes through architects and engineers, and then it separates out a licensed plumber.
I would assume that's a DOB thing, I don't know. I mean, you would know better than me. Well, I don't know, I mean, with the,
If we're trying to clarify for a tenant that they have to pay for it, or make it clear that they're not going to try and get the owner to pay for it, it's the fee of the professional and it's the DOB fees to review, right?
Oh.
And it's the expediter who's filing it, that fee. It's like soft costs, we call those, plus the DOB fee. So there's a few fees involved
okay.
that So when it,
So do you think required fees should be more specific?
There might be a way to encapsulate the thought. If the alternate plans need to be filed with DOB, it shall be the occupant's responsibility to retain and pay any necessary professional or any
filing fee.
filing fees.
Are there ever fees that are not filing fees though? I'm just curious. I'm going to use that term, I was using that term, but are there times where there might be other fees that aren't considered filing fees?
Well, there's the
No, they
fee
would
to
say, they wouldn't pay civil penalties. This is a tenant alternate plan, right? So the tenant would never be paying civil penalties. That would always be the
I mean, there's the design fee, and there's the filing fee, and there's an excavator that might be involved.
No,
Or,
but I think you're asking.
DOB would only have
Right.
filing fee. The asbestos fees, the asbestos is mandatory, but the owner would have already had to
Paid
have
them,
done
right.
that, right? So the tenant should have to pay for asbestos.
Is it a document fee?
This is a no work application.
Right.
So, again, with none of that stuff.
Well, for DOB to even look at our filings, there has to be an asbestos inspection information, but I'm just saying that that would have already been handled in all cases.
Right.
Unless it's like a mechanical question and the alternate plan is opening up an area of the roof or something that wasn't investigated before. And then-
Right.
So then you would have to have an asbestos investigation for that area. But so it's,
So my concern is that if we limit what fees means, that somebody could be misled to say, but the Loft Board rule only says I have to pay these fees, so therefore I don't have to pay these other fees.
right.
And I don't want people to be taken by surprise. We could say which may include, but is not limited to.
Professional and government. Yeah, to give them a sense, if we're trying to educate what might be out there,
Right.
is are you going to spend $10,000 or are you going to spend? So, yeah, I agree with what you're saying. You don't want to limit yourself, but it would be good to mention.
According to line 27, an occupant file an alternative plan without a registered architect or engineer, doesn't say that the applicant must do that.
I'm sorry, say that again?
It says here the applicant can file an alternative narrative statement. There's no indication there that this narrative statement has to be approved or filed by an architect or an engineer.
You're down at the bottom.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, but we're still on 7.
Oh, okay, well, I'm done.
I'm sorry.
To 27, I'm sorry.
Okay, so on line 7, right? The applicant's alternate plan proposed pursuant to this subparagraph is required to be filed with DOB because it requires DOB review. The occupant shall hire a registered architect or professional engineer.
Let me get back to that. I don't know why the occupant has to do this. With apologies to the architect present.
So,
Let's say I want a closet over here, and the file by the owner doesn't have a closet over here, but I want a closet over here. Now he has to get a registered architect to move the closet?
it depends on whether or not that closet is going to interfere with light and air, with egress,
Structure.
with...
Habitable room size. like
Right, I
8
mean,
foot
there-
by 10 foot, like there's.
So it...
Well, but at some point, the applicant and the owner has to get together and agree upon what needs to be done. Presumably, the landlord has a registered architect or engineer or a plumber or electrician involved in it. I don't know why, I mean, this seems to be putting an additional burden on the applicant because he or she doesn't like the way somebody did something, so I have an alternative idea of this. Then you have to get an architect to do it?
So this contemplates that the party, this rule comes into play when the parties are unable to reach consensus. Okay? So we have had conferences, we have tried to get them to agree, and they cannot agree. So here you have this issue, let's say it's the closet, right? And let's assume that it does require DOB review. Well, if the tenant really wants the closet, the tenant needs to file an alternate plan. Now, that kind of alternate plan is not going to involve, well, I guess it could involve sprinkler, right? You could have to have a sprinkler in the closet, right? But probably isn't going to involve sprinkler or mechanical or structural or whatever. It's a simple, straightforward, draw a little plan, file it, and see what DOB says. As opposed to, you have a building with 95 units and the owner wants to take out all of the gas lines or disable all of the gas lines and put in electric. That's a whole different ballgame, right? So this rule comes into play when they have not been able to agree. We've seen it with fire escapes. Keep the fire escape, take off the fire escape. And on both sides, where owners wanted to keep it and tenants wanted them to remove it and tenants wanted it kept and owners wanted to remove it. So, I mean, we've seen those kinds of things on both sides too.
And Elliot, I think maybe there probably are cases where narrow statement, the building's architect is serving as both representing, like,
I hope not.
well, helping the tenants, like sometimes they work amicably.
Well, I mean,
together.
at a narrative saving conference, you can have, let's assume the tenants don't have an architect, right? So the purpose of the conference is for the owner to present their legalization plan to the tenants. So the plans are laid out on the table. The tenants come up one by one. Here's your layout for your unit. Do you have issues? What are your issues? And sometimes the tenants will say, looks good to me. Or they'll say, well, I don't understand why you're doing this, this, and this. In which case the owner's architect will answer. If the tenants have their own architect, then it's usually a conversation between the architects.
All right, I mean, one of the reasons why I've been raising this and thinking about this is that I have never seen a narrative statement. Now, I'm not saying that you should send all of this narrative statement because some are obviously going to be longer than others, but I've never seen one.
Okay.
So I don't even know I know essentially what's supposed to happen there is that the building has to be made, space has to be made legal.
Right.
But outside of that, I'm completely in the blind about what a narrative statement is. Although I've been talking about it for 15 years.
I mean, you know what it is. You just haven't seen it.
A real one.
There are, two of us have been through them. It does, I like to learn.
If it makes you feel better, I'm in a good company, you're in a good company. I haven't seen one.
Well, you've seen one?
No.
This raises a point that we discussed last time we were at this, which is, with the exception of Julie and me, this is a little bit like the board of a hospital discussing what the specifics for the operating room should be, having never set foot in an operating room. And if there were a way to give the board some clearer insight into what transpires. And I'm not suggesting board members should be required to go to one, but
Actually, I think you're not allowed.
yeah, probably not allowed, yeah.
Or you'd have to recuse yourself.
Yeah.
So,
Wait a minute, is it allowed or is it not allowed?
No, I think it's not
It's
allowed.
not allowed, period. Or
Because
is
there
it?
are issues that could arise that could arise if there was an alternate plan.
Understand, but what I'm saying is it really not allowed, or is it if they did show, they would have to recuse themselves?
Yes, there are written rules.
Because then,
Well, clearly they don't live in their home.
well, of course.
Do we need to look this up now?
No,
I mean, is
no,
it
no,
relevant
no.
now? I mean,
I just wondered because if that's, selectively let people go, if it was something.
With regard to section C on page 69,
yeah.
it was my fault, or it was my comment that seemed poorly written and brought this up, and you folks have not had a chance to look at it. So I'd be more than happy to say, can you just give it some thought and allow us to move on at this point?
With C, right?
Yeah, to give some thought to see how it might be made.
Okay. Okay, so D, I mean, this is all stuff that I think has already been discussed. I have it marked to skip. There are some cross-references that were changed on 72, 73. 74, 75, all of that. Just looking through the rest of the section. I think the rest of this section, which ends on 81, I believe, is all changes to cross-references or changing the fonts to match. There's nothing of substance that hasn't already been discussed. So, this is section 4, right? Make sure we're not missing a section. Right. So from here going forward, from 69 to 81, okay, the substantive changes that you see on 69, 70, 71, the board has already discussed. And the rest of it is all changes to cross-reference or fonts to make them all the same. And that would bring us to 201G.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yes,
I do have some questions.
that's fine.
On 69, we have the lines 19 to 18 to 21. We contemplate the tenant being required to serve a statement, a narrative statement with regard to the occupant's objections to comments and criticism of the owner's plan, and any projected increase in code compliance costs. How do we think that I'm, as the occupant, going to know both what my professional says it would cost to do it my way, but do I have the costs for the owner? How do I know there's an increase? Projected.
Well, I guess you know what the owner has proposed, right? So,
But there weren't any costs affiliated with that in my narrative.
no, but you have a professional, right? You're talking to a design professional. I mean, again, I think these are sections that were already there. So, like, let's say the owner wants to put in window A, but you want window B because it provides better sound attenuation. The cost of window A is $100 and the cost of window B is $200. That's a $100 difference in code compliance costs. So I guess the owner could then say, no, window A is going to cost me X and it's actually more than that, right? I mean, the owner has a chance to respond.
Well, that's,
So, I mean, I think that the tenant knows what the differences are between their plan and the owner's plan, right?
I mean, the little cosmetic ones, like a closet or a tile upgrade or a window upgrade, for sure. But anything complicated like switching off gas and going to electric systems, you'd get a whole range of cost estimates depending on who the contractor is. So it is true that that would be an impossible area of contention, or definitely one between the owner and tenant to establish what's the differential.
I mean, ultimately for the board, I don't think it matters. If it's not affecting anybody else's unit, then for the board, I don't think it really matters because we wouldn't.
So the owner and the tenant, if it's 1 or 5, would negotiate, they would just have a private contract negotiation on the differential.
What do you think that's in there?
it would seem to me that I understand that the narrative statement for an alternate plan should describe the occupant's objections to comments on or criticism of the owner's plan.
Right.
But I had no idea what the plumber had estimated for the work to take out the PVC plumbing in my unit and put an event stack where there wasn't one. So if I had to opine on that for some reason, I would have no way of knowing whether my plan was higher or lower. So it just seems like a gotcha.
If you had a professional who, if the idea is that the tenant hired a professional to come up with a different plan with regard to the piping, you don't think that professional would have an opinion as to whether your plan or the owner's plan would be more costly?
They would, but it would be just that, an opinion. I think architects aren't very good at estimating. We just do a cost per square foot guess. I just came off, lately I've been having a construction consultant cost estimator come in because the clients don't want to hear the real price. And if I tell them, they'll get mad at me. So I have like a construction consultant tell them the price, sticker shock, like they'll listen to it. Yeah. So it is always, but there's a lot of, contractors do it very specifically. It's based on a number of factors, how large the permit, if they need the work, blah, blah, blah. There's, versus an architect's number that's always just a guess at a square foot cost per square foot. So I do, but maybe we're getting into the weeds, but there is, I mean, it's similar to, I feel like maybe I heard a lawyer talk about this with a tenant where, like, let's say it was a cosmetic change. It's on them to figure it out with the owner, what they're going to pay for that change.
Well, but again, I mean, these rules all deal with people that can't come to an agreement, right? That's why these rules are here.
Yeah.
What happens if they can't come to an agreement?
So then it would be similar to me to even the overarching one where someone might file at the very end of the CFO being signed off, and the owner wants the tenant to pay for, their share. And we talked about, that you have that guy, the estimator, the guy comes in. It's a similar situation, like someone, third party would need to assess what's the amount, because otherwise I wouldn't trust one architect to know that number.
So let's think about it, right? So I think if I understand what you're saying, it's difficult for tenants to know this, and we should take this out, right?
First off, I don't know, all my professional can do is guess what the owner's cost is. The owner hasn't shown that car.
We could always ask. I mean, we have, particularly recently with, the gas versus electric issues, we have asked them where the owner has priced out how much it would be to do this with gas and how much it would be to do that with electric. The owners have actually provided cost estimates to tenants. So it's not that we couldn't ask them to provide it. But do we need it, I guess is my question.
It seems to me that if I, as a tenant, put in a narrative statement, well, provide a narrative statement to my alternate plan, if I describe my objections to comments on or criticism of the owner's plan, that should be sufficient. If the owner then comes back and says, oh, but wait a minute, your way is going to cost more than my way, here's what my way costs, then I can, then the money battle is engaged. But here, we're kind of asking the tenant to, blue sky. Well, I imagine that what I'm proposing costs 10% more, or 10% less than what I would guess your contractor,
But again, this section only deals with that occupant's unit, right? An alternate plan that's only dealing with stuff inside the unit, so.
We're going to get to that next.
Right, so the tenant here, the occupant here would be bearing those costs if the board decided that the tenant's plan should be implemented, so.
Or would be bearing some portion.
Yeah, so I don't know that we really need to have that phrase here.
I think you're just
Yeah, take it out.
starting fights, yeah.
And after any projected increase in cost.
Yeah, I would end
Yeah.
both D and E after the word plan.
Okay, well, let me read E before we do that. So now, here we have a problem. I don't know that I necessarily agree when it comes to E, because here, I did it again, I took my glasses off, and now I can't read. Okay, if an occupant files an alternate plan that affects other units or common areas, then I think it's important for people to understand that, hey, tenants, other occupants might want to oppose that alternate plan because it will increase their code compliance costs.
Well, in that case, it would be fair to say, and comments on the criticism of the owner's plan and the code compliance costs resulting from the occupant's alternate plan. Again, I don't know
I think that's okay.
Yeah. It's up to, if then all the other tenants want to say to the owner, well, how much would this cost compared to what you're planning to do?
And so we would take out projected increase in, it would be, and any code compliance costs resulting from the occupant's alternate plan. I wonder if that places a more onerous burden on occupants. Because now, instead of just highlighting the differences, do they have to then do all of the code compliance costs? Right, maybe projected increase in was there to narrow the scope of the code compliance costs that a tenant would have to provide, an occupant would have to provide if they're filing an alternate plan.
Well, we could just say, and the code compliance resulting from the, well, it says it already.
From
It limits
the
it.
work in the occupants, from the work stated in the occupants alternate plan? related to the occupant's alternate plan. You good with that?
Yeah. Not from, related to.
Related to.
Yeah, the thing I think that's going to start fights where you might be able to avoid them is projected increases. As long as that's out, I'm
Okay.
much more satisfied. Next question right after that, we go through in F.
So I'm sorry, so when you just, we have, and D, that's starting paragraph of line 16, we still,
So on D,
You want to take a shot at this tablet?
C.
so, no, on,
D.
so on line 19 on page 69, we're going to end the sentence at owner's plan, period. And I'm going to take out that last clause that follows the end.
Line 19.
Right? And then on line 26, we're going to take our projected increase in. Okay. Moving on.
Yeah, my question in F on 70 is, haven't we outlined how to service for these, is there a way we can consolidate this?
You could do it by a cross-reference.
There's no difference, it's exactly the same. right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's,
So there's two reasons why I think it's unadvisable. Number one is because if you change the cross-reference, then you have to remember to change. If you change the cross-reference section, then you have to change it here. So that's one of the reasons. And the other is, I think it provides better notice if you have the text right in there. However, if you want to cross-reference, then we will cross-reference. So decide.
I'm just trying to shorten it, but
It's better.
Whatever the board wants.
because of course I read it and say, well, is this exactly the same or have they changed something? But no, it is exactly the
I
same.
cut and pasted it, so it should be exactly the same unless I made a typo when I cut and paste.
All right.
Okay,
If
so.
you feel it's better to have it there, I'm fine.
Okay. So you want to stop now? Okay, so then we'll stop with G on page 70.
Is where we're going to start next time?
That's where we'll start.
Did we make good progress, or is that?
I think we made good progress, yes.
Okay.
Before I close this, board members, does anyone have any last minute? Okay. This will conclude our September 5th, 2019 Loft Board meeting. Our next public meeting will be held Thursday, September 19th, 2019 at 2 p.m. at 22 Reach Street, Spector Hall. Thank you, everyone.